Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I had just finished a long day at work, my feet aching as I walked toward my apartment building. The evening air was cool, and I felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settling in. As I approached the entrance, I noticed a man standing near the door, his posture rigid and his gaze fixed forward. He wasn't doing anything particularly unusual, but there was something unsettling about his stillness. He didn't seem to notice me at first, so I slowed my pace, pretending to check something on my phone, hoping that he would move on. I glanced up discreetly, hoping to catch a glimpse of his face. His expression was neutral, but his eyes seemed empty, as though he were staring at something in the distance, something that wasn't really there. I took a few steps back, not wanting to get any closer to him, but he remained where he was, not acknowledging my presence. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. It wasn't like he was threatening, but the way he stood there, so still, felt wrong. There was an unnatural tension in the air, a heaviness that made my heart race. I debated whether I should turn around and walk to the nearest coffee shop or wait to see if he would move. But I had already been on my feet for hours, and I just wanted to go inside, sit down, and relax. I kept checking my phone, pretending to scroll through messages, all the while keeping him in my peripheral vision. Every few seconds I'd glance up, but he had not moved an inch. It felt as though time had slowed, and the moments stretched on unnervingly. After a few minutes, I finally made my decision. I couldn't stand there pretending any longer. I would have to just walk past him and hope nothing happened. I mustered all the courage I could, taking a few slow steps toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest. As I passed him, I kept my eyes fixed on the entrance, not daring to look at him directly. But just as I reached the door, I felt a cold chill down my spine. It was the sensation of someone watching me, something that made my skin crawl. I quickly fumbled with my keys, desperate to get inside. The door swung open and I stepped inside, locking it behind me. My breath was shallow and I felt a weight on my chest as I leaned against the door, trying to calm myself. I told myself it was nothing, that I had overreacted. After all, he hadn't even said a word to me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something about the encounter wasn't as simple as it seemed. I tried to shrug it off, but the unsettling feeling lingered, gnawing at me. I dropped my keys onto the table and walked toward the couch, hoping to distract myself with a book or some television. But as I moved into the living room, I heard something that stopped me cold: footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, steady and deliberate, echoing through the hallway. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, as though someone were walking back and forth outside my door. It was impossible. I had locked the door. I was sure of it. I quietly made my way to the peephole, trying to see if the man was still there. But when I peered through, there was nothing. Just the hallway, empty and quiet. The footsteps had stopped. I stood there, my hand trembling on the doorknob, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just the sound of someone walking past, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. The man had been standing there, unmoving, for who knows how long, and now someone, maybe him, maybe someone else, was right outside. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone in my apartment. Every little sound seemed amplified now. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside. I sat down on the couch, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen. The minutes dragged on in silence, each one heavier than the last. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just the neighbor coming home late, or maybe the footsteps had been a figment of my imagination. But the silence felt oppressive, like a storm hanging on the horizon. I couldn't bring myself to move, couldn't bring myself to look outside again. What if he was still there watching? What if he was waiting for me to do something, to make a move? Then, just as I thought I might be imagining everything, I heard it again, the footsteps. But this time they weren't outside my door. They were coming from inside the hallway. I could hear them growing closer, the distinct sound of shoes scraping against the floor. I held my breath, my heart racing. Was someone in the building? Or was it him, the man who had been standing outside, slowly creeping toward my apartment? I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. I couldn't stay hidden in here forever. I needed to call someone, to do something, but I couldn't move. I felt paralyzed by fear, as though my body had been frozen in place. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and dialed the number for the building's security, but the line was dead. I tried again, but nothing happened. The only sound I could hear now was the slow, deliberate footsteps, getting closer and closer to my door. I didn't know what to do. My mind was spinning, and all I could think of was that man outside. Had he been following me? Had he been waiting for me to let my guard down? I didn't want to open the door, but I couldn't keep hiding forever. As the footsteps grew closer, I heard a soft knock at the door, faint but unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat. Story 2. It was a typical afternoon when I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot of the local grocery store. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pavement. I parked my car near the far corner, the spot I liked, because it was always quiet and away from the hustle and bustle of the main entrance. I gathered my things and started heading towards the store, but then I heard someone call out to me. I turned to find a man standing near the edge of the lot, about 30 feet away. He was tall, with unkempt hair and a worn jacket, the kind of appearance that immediately made me feel uneasy. He waved at me, a hesitant sort of gesture, and called out, "Excuse me, can you help me? I've lost my dog." His voice was slightly shaky, like he wasn't entirely sure if I would help him or not. I paused, unsure of what to make of the situation. I looked around the parking lot. There were a few cars scattered about, but no sign of anyone else nearby. I felt a twinge of discomfort, but I tried to shake it off. "I'm sorry, I can't help you," I said, giving him a polite but firm smile as I started walking toward the store again. The last thing I wanted to do was get involved in something strange or potentially dangerous. The man seemed to notice my hesitation and took a step closer, his face showing a mix of concern and urgency. "Please," he continued, his voice almost pleading now, "I'm really worried about my dog. She's been missing for hours, and I don't know where she went. Can you just help me look around for a minute?" His eyes were wide, and there was a slight tremor in his hands as he spoke. His body language was tense, as if he was ready to spring into action at any moment. I felt a knot form in my stomach. There was something off about the whole situation. His desperation didn't seem genuine. "No, I really can't help," I said more firmly this time, my pace quickening as I moved towards the entrance. I was trying not to show how uncomfortable I was, but my body was reacting in a way I couldn't ignore. I wanted to get inside the store where there were people, where I would feel safe. But the man wasn't listening. Instead of stepping back, he moved closer, now only about 10 feet away. I stopped in my tracks, my heart suddenly racing. Something about his proximity felt wrong, like I was being cornered. "Please, I really need your help," he repeated, his voice a little lower, more insistent now. His eyes darted around, scanning the parking lot as if he were expecting someone, or perhaps trying to keep an eye on the surroundings. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The way he kept closing the distance made my skin crawl, and I instinctively took a step back. "I told you, I can't help," I said, my voice shaking slightly but still firm. My mind raced, wondering why this man wasn't respecting my boundaries. He had asked for help once, and I had already said no. Why wasn't that enough? As I looked around, I noticed that there were no other pedestrians in the lot, only a few parked cars, their windows reflecting the fading light of the day. I felt isolated, vulnerable. Just as I was about to turn and make a run for the store, I saw headlights coming from the entrance. Another car had just pulled into the lot. Relief washed over me, but the man didn't seem to notice the approaching vehicle. His attention was still fixed on me, his body now almost too close for comfort. My pulse quickened as the car parked a few spaces down. The man finally seemed to acknowledge the movement, glancing over his shoulder as the vehicle's engine sputtered to a stop. Without warning, the man turned abruptly and started walking toward the car, his pace quickening as he moved away from me. He didn't look back, but I could see the way his body stiffened, as if he was suddenly in a hurry. I stood frozen, watching him walk toward the driver's side of the car, the door opening as if the driver was already expecting him. The car's engine cut off, and I heard the sound of a conversation low and too far away for me to make out the words. I quickly looked at the store entrance, feeling a sudden urge to get inside. I started walking again, this time with a renewed sense of urgency. My footsteps echoed across the pavement as I hurried toward the store doors, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease that the encounter had left me with. As I glanced back one last time, I saw the man talking to the person in the car, his back turned to me now. I couldn't explain why, but the sight of him leaving so quickly didn't sit right with me. Something about the whole exchange felt rehearsed, like a carefully staged act meant to draw me in. I entered the store and made my way to the checkout, my mind still replaying the incident. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly avoided something far more sinister than I had initially realized. Had the man really lost his dog, or had he been trying to get close to me for some other reason? I had no answers, just a vague sense that something wasn't right, and that I had done the right thing by walking away. When I left the store, the parking lot was emptier than before, the earlier car gone. I hesitated as I approached my own vehicle, scanning the area one last time to make sure nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There was no sign of the man, no sign of the car he had been talking to. Still, the encounter stayed with me, a lingering memory of how close I had come to being drawn into something I couldn't understand. The unsettling feeling in my chest didn't fade until I was safely back home, the door locked behind me, and the world outside fading into the quiet of the night. Story 3. I stood on the sidewalk, watching as my ride-share app displayed the countdown to my ride's arrival. It had been a long day, and I was eager to get home. The air was cool, a slight breeze ruffling the leaves of the nearby trees. The street was quiet, save for the occasional passing car, the sound of tires on wet pavement filling the silence. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, glancing down at my phone again. The ride was just around the corner. As I looked up, a car came into view, its headlights cutting through the dark. I watched it approach, my anticipation building. But when it stopped in front of me, I immediately felt a sense of unease. This wasn't the car I had ordered. It was a black sedan, sleek and shiny, but unfamiliar. I stepped back instinctively, my hand clutching my phone a little tighter. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't make out the driver's face. The window rolled down slowly, and I was about to ask if they had the wrong person when the driver spoke. "Are you my name?" The voice was deep and calm, but there was something off about it, something I couldn't place. It wasn't the voice of the driver I had been expecting. The voice felt too familiar in an unsettling way. My heart skipped a beat, and I hesitated for a moment before replying. Yes, but this isn't my ride," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I ordered a different car. I took a small step backward, my instincts telling me something was wrong. I had never seen this car before, and yet the driver knew my name. My mind raced as I tried to think of a logical explanation. Maybe it was a mistake, a mix-up with the app. But the way the driver was looking at me, the way he said my name, it felt intentional. The driver didn't respond immediately, just watching me through the dark window. I could barely make out his features, just a shadowy figure behind the glass. His face was obscured by the darkness, but there was something in the way he sat there, still and unmoving, that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't even seem to be blinking. His gaze remained fixed on me, and for a moment I felt like I was being studied. I took another step back, my finger hovering over the app on my phone. Maybe I could cancel this ride and request another one. Maybe it was just a simple mistake, nothing to worry about. But before I could act, the driver spoke again, his voice even lower this time. "I've been waiting for you." The words echoed in my mind, and I felt a surge of panic. I didn't know this person. I didn't recognize this car. How could he have been waiting for me? I stood frozen for a moment, my mind scrambling for answers. Was this some kind of joke? Was someone playing a prank on me? I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart was pounding in my chest. This didn't feel right. My fingers began to shake as I gripped my phone harder, debating whether I should call the authorities or just turn and run. My instincts told me to leave, to get away from this car and this stranger as quickly as possible. I took a step to the side, preparing to walk away when the driver finally moved. He pushed open the car door, the sound of it creaking in the quiet night air. My breath caught in my throat as he stepped out of the car. He was tall, his features still obscured by the darkness. He didn't make any sudden moves, but there was something unnerving about the way he stood there, just watching me. I didn't want to turn my back on him, but I knew I had to get away. I was too close to him now, too close to the car. "Wait," the driver said, his voice low but firm. "I'm here to take you home." His words sent a cold wave of fear through me. He couldn't know where I lived. I hadn't shared that information with anyone. I had simply requested a ride to a general location, the closest drop-off point. I hadn't given any details. The realization hit me hard, and the panic rose in my chest again. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know you. This isn't my ride. I'm going to call a different car." I started to back away, reaching for my phone, but the driver's eyes never left me. The intensity of his gaze was almost suffocating. He didn't move to stop me, but there was something about the way he held himself that made me hesitate. I took another step back, and just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard the soft click of the car door closing behind me. My breath caught in my throat as the driver spoke one last time, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I'll be seeing you soon." My body went cold, and without thinking, I turned and ran. I didn't care if the driver was still watching or if he had even moved. I just needed to get away. I sprinted down the sidewalk, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the sound of footsteps behind me, but when I dared to glance over my shoulder, there was no one there. The street was empty, and the car had vanished. I didn't stop running until I reached the nearest building, my heart still racing. I pulled out my phone and tried to request another ride. This time I made sure it was the correct car, double-checking the details before I confirmed. As I waited for the ride to arrive, I glanced over my shoulder one more time. The streets were quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It wasn't until much later, after I finally made it home, that I realized something strange. The name the driver had called me wasn't the one I had used for the rideshare app. It was the name I hadn't used in years. Story 4. I was up before dawn, lacing my sneakers for an early morning jog. The streets were quiet, the world still wrapped in the hushed silence of night, giving way to the first hints of daylight. My routine was familiar: run a few miles, clear my head, and return home feeling ready to face the day. It was a peaceful time, one of the few moments when the bustle of life hadn't yet begun. The neighborhood was sleepy as I made my way down the empty streets. I passed the same familiar houses, their windows dark, their front porches empty. There was something comforting about the early morning stillness. As I turned a corner, I noticed a van parked along the curb. It had been there the last few days, but this morning it seemed out of place, sitting there in the quiet. The van was dark blue, a nondescript model with tinted windows, and it didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood, at least as far as I knew. I continued jogging, my thoughts drifting as I picked up my pace. On my second lap, I passed the same van again. The street was still empty. the air crisp and cool against my skin. Nothing had changed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the van was watching me. It was just an old vehicle, surely, but something about it felt strange, almost as if it were waiting for something or someone. I shrugged off the thought, attributing it to my overactive imagination. By the time I came around for my third pass, the van was still parked in the same spot. I didn't look at it directly this time, but my gaze lingered briefly as I jogged by. The side mirrors reflected the weak light of the rising sun, but everything seemed unchanged. My footsteps echoed against the pavement, blending into the soft hum of the morning. For some reason, though, I felt uneasy. It was as though someone was watching me, even though the street was empty. As I neared the van for the fourth time, I felt a strange sense of dread creep up my spine. My pace slowed slightly, and I couldn't help but glance over at the vehicle. This time, the side door of the van was slightly ajar. The opening wasn't wide, but it was enough for me to notice. I didn't remember it being open before, but maybe I hadn't paid enough attention on my previous laps. Still, my stomach tightened as I ran past, and I fought the urge to look back. I could feel my heart rate increase, though I tried to convince myself it was just nerves. People parked on the streets all the time. Maybe someone had left the door open by mistake. Maybe it was just the early morning air playing tricks on me. But something didn't sit right. My eyes flickered over to the van once more as I rounded the corner. I was sure I saw movement inside, though I couldn't say for certain what it was. A shadow, perhaps, or the reflection of the streetlights. I quickened my pace, pushing myself harder to finish the last leg of my jog. My mind raced with questions. Why was the van still there? Why had the door been open, even just a crack? It wasn't normal, but I couldn't put my finger on why it bothered me so much. The closer I got to home, the more I felt the weight of the thought hanging over me. I wanted to forget about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I arrived back at my house, but I couldn't shake the image of the van from my mind. I went through the motions of stretching, trying to clear my thoughts, but the van kept creeping back into my mind. I tried to reason with myself there was nothing unusual about the van. It was probably just someone who lived nearby or someone passing through. But deep down, I knew something was off. After a few minutes, I decided I needed to know. I wasn't sure what exactly I was hoping to find, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I grabbed my phone and decided to take a quick walk down the block to check on the van. I told myself I wasn't being paranoid, that I just needed to put my mind at ease. As I approached the corner, I hesitated for a moment, then turned down the street where the van had been parked. To my surprise, the van was still there, but now the door was wide open. The interior of the van was dark, but I could see the faint outline of something inside a bag, a jacket, maybe just the shadows of the seats. There was no sign of anyone around, no one walking by, no one in the vicinity. I felt a chill run down my spine as I stood there, staring at the van. It was as though the vehicle had been waiting for me to come back, to come closer. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart racing. I couldn't explain why I felt so compelled to look inside, but the urge to know more was overwhelming. I reached the van and peered inside. The seats were empty, and there was nothing particularly alarming about the interior, just a couple of papers scattered across the floor. But the van smelled faintly of something strange, almost like stale air and leather. I quickly stepped back, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. Turning to leave, I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out of the van or confront me. But the street was still deserted, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. I didn't know if I should feel relieved or even more uneasy. I kept walking, my thoughts swirling in a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Was the van really nothing more than a random vehicle parked on a quiet street, or was there something more to it? The possibility that I might never know for sure hung over me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just come face to face with something strange, something I wasn't supposed to notice. Story 5. I was home alone, enjoying the peace and quiet of a lazy afternoon. The house felt empty, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. I had spent most of the day reading, the kind of simple comfort I cherished when there was no one else around to distract me. The world outside seemed calm, but suddenly I heard something that made my heart stop my front door opening. The sound was unmistakable, the creak of the door as it swung inward, followed by the soft thud of it closing. I froze. My first thought was that it might be a neighbor. Maybe someone had accidentally come to the wrong house. But the sound didn't fit the usual rhythm of someone visiting. It felt different, more deliberate. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively reached for my phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed the police. The operator answered quickly, her calm voice a sharp contrast to the panic flooding my veins. I told her what had happened, how I'd heard the door open and close, how I was home alone, and how I was terrified someone was in the house. She instructed me to lock myself in a room, stay on the line with her, and wait for the police to arrive. I did as she told me, my heart pounding in my chest. The house felt enormous, empty and silent except for the growing rush of my own breath in my ears. I locked myself in my bedroom and moved quietly to the farthest corner. The door was shut, the lock clicking into place with an unsettling finality. I pressed myself against the wall, feeling the weight of every creak of the house as if something or someone was getting closer. My thoughts raced as I wondered what had caused that sound. Could it have been the wind? No, the door didn't creak like that when it was just the wind. Someone had opened it and someone had closed it. Minutes felt like hours. Every small noise seemed amplified in the stillness, and my mind began to wander, imagining shadows creeping just beyond the door. I clutched my phone in my hand, waiting for the sound of sirens, for the sound of anyone arriving to take control of the situation. My eyes flicked nervously to the window, half expecting to see someone watching from outside. I felt trapped, both by the room and by my own spiraling thoughts. Then, a sudden sound shattered the silence, the unmistakable scrape of the back door sliding open. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. My phone was still pressed to my ear, but I couldn't speak. I listened, straining for any other noise. There was nothing, just the open door, and then silence. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck. Whoever had entered the house was still here, still somewhere close. The police were on their way, I reminded myself. I just needed to wait. But the waiting felt unbearable, the seconds stretching into an eternity. The sound of footsteps was all I could think of, the thought of someone moving through the house as if it were their own. I kept my back pressed against the wall, not daring to move an inch. The quiet stretched on, and all I could do was listen to my own racing heartbeat. Finally, after what felt like an agonizing amount of time, the sound of sirens echoed faintly through the neighborhood. Relief washed over me in waves, but it was tinged with a lingering dread. The police were here. I wasn't alone anymore. I could hear their voices now, muffled as they approached the house. They were outside, knocking on the door, calling out, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the room. I wanted to make sure it was them before I let anyone in. When the knock finally came at the door, I rushed to answer it, relief flooding my chest. I opened it slowly, keeping the chain lock in place, but the moment I saw the officers, I unlocked it and let them inside. They moved quickly, scanning the area with practiced efficiency, asking me questions as they passed. "Where did you hear the sound?" one officer asked. I pointed down the hall, my voice shaky. "The front door, and then the back door," I said. They nodded, moving toward the back of the house. My heart was still racing, the adrenaline pumping through me, but I was starting to feel like the worst was over. That is, until the officer returned, his face grim. "The back door was open," he said, "but your front door was locked when we arrived. No one's been through the front door." I stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I heard it open. I heard it close. Unsure of it." He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, watching me for a moment. "There are no signs of forced entry," he said finally, his voice low. "It's possible someone opened it from the inside, maybe a draft or something." But I wasn't sure. There had been no draft, and I hadn't gone near the front door after I heard it close. The door hadn't just opened by itself. The officer continued, "We'll need to check the area further. You're safe now, but we suggest you don't stay here alone tonight. We'll make sure to keep an eye on things for now." I nodded numbly, my mind reeling. I didn't understand what had happened. The police had arrived, and everything seemed fine, but the feeling of unease still clung to me. The back door had been open, but the front door, where I had heard the sound, remained locked. How could that be? The officers finished their sweep of the house, assuring me that they would be monitoring the area, but I knew I wouldn't feel safe here tonight. As they left, I looked around, feeling a growing sense of dread settle into my bones. Whoever or whatever had opened that door was still out there. Story 6. I sat alone in the corner booth of the diner, staring at my half-eaten plate of fries. The place was small, dimly lit, with the smell of grease and coffee filling the air. I liked it here, the quiet comfort of a place where nothing ever seemed to change. I was used to dining alone, and tonight felt no different, just a brief break from the usual rush of life. But as I ate, I felt something I couldn't quite place. A prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as though someone was watching me. I glanced up, my eyes scanning the room. Most of the tables were empty, except for a man sitting across the diner near the counter. He looked out of place, like someone who didn't belong in such a mundane setting. His clothes were neat, a dark coat and slacks that seemed too expensive for a diner. But what caught my attention was his gaze. He was staring directly at me, not looking away, his expression unreadable. I tried to shake the unease creeping over me. Maybe he was just lost in thought, or maybe he hadn't realized how intensely he was staring. I returned my focus to my food, but I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being scrutinized. Every now and then, I would glance up again, only to find his eyes fixed on me, unblinking. My stomach tightened. It wasn't the kind of stare that made you feel seen in the way that a casual glance might. No, this was something different, almost predatory. It unsettled me, but I tried to convince myself that it was nothing, just a strange coincidence. Still, I felt the unease settle deeper in my chest as I finished my meal, the man's stare never wavering. I wiped my mouth with a napkin, trying to muster the courage to leave. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I needed to go, like something about the situation wasn't right. I stood up, tossing the napkin into the trash can by the counter, and made my way to the register. The man was still there, his eyes on me. As I reached the cashier, I could feel the tension in the air, as though something was about to happen. The cashier, a young woman with messy blonde hair, smiled at me politely as I approached. She punched in the total for my meal, her fingers clicking against the register. As I reached for my wallet, she glanced up at me with a strange look in her eyes. It wasn't the usual polite smile I was used to. "Your bill's been taken care of," she said, her voice soft but firm. I blinked, confusion clouding my thoughts. "What do you mean?" "I'm going to pay." The cashier shook her head. "A man already covered it. He said you're his daughter." I froze. My heart seemed to skip a beat. I couldn't process the words. I glanced over at the man by the counter, still staring at me, a cold smile now tugging at the corners of his mouth. It sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know him, and I certainly didn't have a father who would show up in a random diner and pay for my meal. I tried to clear the confusion from my mind. I don't know that man." The cashier shrugged, glancing over at the man and then back at me. He insisted. "Said he's been trying to find you for a long time." My throat went dry. My mind raced to connect the dots, but I couldn't. Who was this man? How did he know me? Was he some kind of stalker? I hadn't seen him before in my life. I didn't even have a father anymore. He had passed away years ago. So why was this stranger saying he was my father? I felt like I was drowning in questions with no answers. Before I could say anything else, the man stood up from his seat. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he knew he had all the time in the world. He didn't hurry toward me. Instead, he walked with purpose, as if he had been expecting this moment. He stopped at the edge of the counter, still watching me with that unnerving gaze. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know you. I don't know who you are." The man smiled, a thin, unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's been a long time." I took a step back, my chest tightening. This was wrong. Something about this situation was completely off. I wanted to run, but my legs felt frozen, like I was stuck in place. The man's eyes never left mine, and it felt as though he could see through me, as if he knew everything about me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, more to myself than to him. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an old, weathered photo. He handed it to me without a word, his hand lingering just a moment too long. I hesitated before taking it, but when I glanced at the photo, my stomach dropped. It was a picture of a younger version of myself standing beside a man I didn't recognize. The photo was faded, yellowing at the edges, but the image was unmistakable. My face was there, a face I knew all too well, but the man beside me wasn't someone I had ever met. I shook my head, my mind reeling. "This doesn't make sense. I don't remember you." The man's smile faded, and for a brief moment his eyes darkened. "You will," he said softly. "You will remember me." "Ah." I stepped back, holding the photo away from me like it was toxic. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want anything to do with you." The man didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out of the diner, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the photo still clutched in my hand. The weight of it seemed to press on me, suffocating me, as if it were a key to something I wasn't ready to unlock. The cashier looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could do was stare at the photo, the image of a man who claimed to be my father, but who felt like a complete stranger. And as I stood there, the questions kept swirling in my mind. Who was he? Why had he said that? And what did he want from me? Story 7. It had been a typical Thursday afternoon. I was at the grocery store, navigating my way through the aisles, picking up the usual items for the week. The store was busy with people grabbing what they needed, and the chatter of shopping carts rolling over the linoleum floor mixed with the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I felt like I was just another shopper in the crowd, moving from shelf to shelf, lost in the routine of choosing between brands of cereal and picking up the freshest vegetables. It wasn't until I turned down the aisle with canned goods that I noticed him. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. A man, probably in his late 30s, stood a few feet away, reaching for a can of tomatoes. I glanced over at him briefly before continuing my search for the best price on soup. As I turned to grab a box from the shelf, I noticed him again, a few steps behind me. He had moved down the aisle just like I had. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was nothing, that he was just another shopper, doing his rounds like I was. But as I moved to the next aisle, I couldn't help but notice that he was still there. I was looking for pasta, but when I turned the corner, there he was, at the end of the aisle, pretending to be engrossed in the various pasta brands. A chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the fact that he was shopping at the same time as me. People did that all the time. No, it was the way he seemed to be following me, lingering just far enough to not be immediately obvious, but close enough that it felt uncomfortable. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was a busy store. The aisles were narrow, and people tended to cross paths frequently. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized that he hadn't actually picked anything up. He wasn't putting anything in his cart. He was just there, watching me. I decided to keep going, hoping I could shake the feeling. I walked briskly through a couple more aisles, grabbing some vegetables and a loaf of bread. He wasn't in my immediate line of sight, so I thought maybe I had overestimated the situation. I felt a bit better, telling myself I was being dramatic. But as I rounded the corner to the dairy section, I saw him again. This time he was closer, almost as if he had been waiting for me to come into view. My heart began to race, and I could feel my anxiety rising. I quickly grabbed a carton of eggs and turned down the next aisle, trying to put some distance between us. But to my horror, when I glanced back over my shoulder, I saw him following me once more. His movements were smooth, calculated. He wasn't rushing or acting like someone in a hurry. He was simply trailing behind me, just enough to be in my peripheral vision, but never so close that it would be immediately obvious to anyone else. I started to panic. My mind raced with the worst possibilities. What if he was trying to rob me? Or worse, what if he had other intentions? I told myself to stay calm, to think logically. This was just a coincidence. I was in a public place, surrounded by other shoppers. But no matter how many times I told myself that, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I decided to make my move. I quickly changed direction and walked to the other side of the store. If he was following me, I needed to make sure I wasn't so easy to track. I grabbed a few items from the shelf I wasn't originally planning to buy, just to make it look like I was distracted and not in a rush. But as I made my way toward the checkout lanes, my stomach dropped when I saw him again, standing near the front of the store, just as if he had been waiting for me. I was close to the self-checkout, and I quickly assessed my options. I needed to pay and leave as soon as possible, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still following me. I reached for my phone in my pocket, my fingers trembling. I opened the camera app and casually aimed it at him, hoping to get a shot of his face just in case. I snapped a quick picture and pocketed my phone before he could see. But as I moved toward the self-checkout, I realized that he had already moved closer to me. He wasn't in the aisle anymore. He was standing just behind me, waiting for me to finish scanning my items. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I had to do something, anything. I glanced around at the other checkout lanes, trying to think quickly. There was an open lane at the far end of the store. Without thinking, I switched my cart to that lane, hoping I could get through without him noticing. I started scanning my items quickly, but to my horror, I saw him following me again, right into the new lane. I tried not to let my fear show, but my heart was pounding in my chest. He was standing behind me now, not too close, but close enough that I could feel his presence. I glanced over at the cashier, hoping for some kind of intervention, but she was busy with another customer. I finished scanning my items as quickly as I could, grabbed my receipt, and practically ran out of the store. The door's automatic sensor opened, and I hurried outside into the cool air, my pulse still racing. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see if he was behind me. I just wanted to get in my car and drive far away from the store. As I fumbled with my keys and locked the car door behind me, I took a shaky breath. My hands were still trembling, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been following me on purpose. The encounter had been too strange, too unsettling. I pulled out of the parking lot, glancing in my rearview mirror every few seconds, but there was no sign of him. The drive home was a blur. My mind kept replaying the way he had followed me, step by step, every aisle, every turn. Had I imagined it? Was I just being paranoid? Maybe, but as I pulled into my driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something far worse. Story 8. I had just gotten home from work, feeling the usual fatigue settling into my bones. It had been a long day, and the only thing I wanted was to sit down, unwind, and forget about everything for a while. I kicked off my shoes, grabbed my phone, and walked into the kitchen to make something quick to eat. It was when I sat down at the table to check my messages that everything started to feel wrong. My voicemail inbox had a new message marked as urgent. I didn't recognize the number that had called, but I decided to listen anyway, thinking it might be something important. As soon as I pressed the play button, I was met with the sound of my own voice. At first, I thought it was just a glitch, some strange recording, but as the conversation continued, I realized that it was no mistake. It was a conversation I had earlier that day, one that I could have sworn I hadn't had. I could hear myself speaking in the voicemail, my tone casual and familiar, as if I were talking to someone I knew well. The words I heard were not from a conversation I remembered having at all. The strangest part was the content. It was a conversation I had never had with anyone. I was talking about mundane things, nothing of real consequence, but the voice on the other end of the line wasn't mine. It wasn't a recording of someone else. It was a perfectly clear, perfectly normal exchange, as if I had been talking to myself. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I quickly checked the timestamp on the voicemail, and the recording was from just a few hours ago, during a time when I had been at work and couldn't have possibly been talking on the phone. My phone had been in my pocket the entire time, silent and unused. The more I listened to the message, the more confused I became. Who was on the other end of that conversation? And why had it been recorded on my voicemail? I ended the voicemail, my fingers trembling as I put the phone down. A sense of unease settled over me, and I felt like I was trapped in some strange, surreal nightmare. There had to be an explanation, right? Maybe it was some sort of prank or glitch in the system, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't something so easily explained away. No one could have made that recording without my knowledge, and no one had been with me earlier to overhear any conversation I didn't remember having. I paced around my apartment, trying to calm my nerves, but every time I thought about the voicemail, my heart would race. I checked my phone again, my mind running wild with possibilities. I went through my recent calls list, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There were no missed calls from unknown numbers, no strange entries, nothing that could explain the voicemail. I didn't recognize the number that had left the message, and it was a number I had never seen before. For a few moments I sat there, paralyzed by confusion and fear. The logical part of my mind told me that there must be a simple explanation, but everything about the voicemail felt wrong. How had the conversation been recorded? Why was my own voice coming through so clearly? And why did it feel like the person on the other end knew things about me, things that I hadn't shared with anyone? I decided to call the number back. It was a decision I regretted almost immediately. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Perhaps I thought that if I called the number, I would somehow unravel the mystery. Maybe I thought I would hear a familiar voice on the other end, someone I knew who could explain everything away with a laugh. But when the phone rang and someone picked up, the voice on the other end wasn't familiar at all. It was calm and smooth, but it didn't belong to anyone I knew. "You've been listening to my message," the voice said. It sounded almost amused, as though it knew exactly how I felt. "I hope you enjoyed it." I felt my breath catch in my throat. I didn't know how to respond. The voice sounded so casual, so confident, like it was used to people being shocked or confused by the situation. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I had no idea what was going on, and I felt more alone than I ever had before. "You must have a lot of questions," the voice continued, still calm. "Don't worry, all of them will be answered in time." I hung up, my hands shaking. The phone slipped from my grip, and I stared at it, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The voice on the other end had been too calm, too collected. It was like the person had been waiting for me to call back, like they knew I would. The words from the voicemail echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the conversation that I never remembered having. Who was this person? And how had they managed to make it sound like I was speaking with them? I spent the rest of the evening trying to piece things together, searching for any clue that could explain what had happened. I checked my phone again, hoping that maybe I had somehow missed something. But everything seemed normal, no strange apps or messages, no unusual notifications. It was as if nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. But I knew better. The message, the voice, the feeling of being watched, it all felt far too real to ignore. I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been in control of the situation, that they were somehow manipulating me. The feeling of being hunted, of being targeted in some way, made me feel exposed, vulnerable. I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of something bigger. What if the voicemail wasn't just a random incident? What if it was a warning, one that I hadn't yet fully understood? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The strange voicemail kept playing over and over in my mind, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the face of the person on the other end of the line, someone I had never met, yet who seemed to know so much about me. I wasn't sure what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't alone anymore. Story 9. The air in the hotel room felt stale, the kind of stale that made me uneasy. I had just checked in, the lobby empty and quiet, which was unusual for a busy hotel on a weekend night. The room itself was clean, if a bit outdated, with faded curtains and a hum from the air conditioner that never quite stopped. I had planned to relax after a long drive, maybe watch some TV and unwind, but the feeling of being watched lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to shake it off as I unpacked my bag and flopped down on the bed, flicking through the channels on the TV. The strange sensation of unease didn't go away, but I blamed it on exhaustion from the long trip. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water would soothe my nerves. As the steam filled the bathroom, I let my mind wander, thinking about the strange quietness of the hotel and how empty the lobby had seemed when I'd checked in. When I got out of the shower, the feeling of discomfort hadn't faded. The room felt colder now, even though I had turned the heat on. I reached for the remote to change the channel, but just as I did, I heard a faint sound, like a soft scraping against the door. I froze. At first I thought it was the wind, or maybe the walls settling. But then it came again, louder this time, a deliberate scratching, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying to turn the doorknob. My heart leapt into my throat. I stood still, listening, my breath caught in my chest. The sound continued, a slow, rhythmic turn of the knob, as if someone was testing whether the door was locked. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the door, feeling my pulse race. My mind raced too, searching for any logical explanation. Maybe it was a maintenance worker, or another guest who had confused the rooms, but something in my gut told me it was neither. I grabbed the phone by the bedside table and quickly dialed the front desk. The line clicked, and a calm, professional voice answered. "Good evening, how can I assist you?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure how to explain what had just happened. Hi. I'm in room 302, and I think someone's trying to get into my room." There was a brief silence on the other end. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we haven't sent anyone to your room tonight. Are you sure you've locked the door?" "I locked it," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "but I can hear someone trying to open it." "I understand. Please stay on the line. I'll notify security immediately," the voice said before the line went dead. I stared at the door, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The sound had stopped, but the unsettling feeling hadn't. I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, a glitch in the system, or a prank, but deep down I knew something was wrong. The silence in the room felt suffocating, as if something was waiting, just beyond the door, watching. Minutes passed, but no one came. The hotel room remained eerily quiet, the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the building the only sounds. I glanced at the peephole in the door, but I couldn't see anything through it. There was no movement outside, no shadow passing by. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. I picked up the phone again, but before I could dial, the knocking started. It was faint at first, just a light tap, but it quickly escalated into something more insistent, a series of rapid knocks, followed by more scratching at the door. I flinched, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest I was sure the person outside could hear it. I backed away from the door, pressing myself against the far wall, my mind racing with panic. Who was out there? And why were they trying to get in? I picked up the phone again and dialed the front desk, my fingers shaking. This time, the person on the other end sounded more urgent. "Mom, I've called security, but they're on their way to another floor. I'm afraid they may be delayed." "Delayed?" I stammered. "There's someone trying to break into my room. You have to send someone now." "I understand, ma'am. Please stay calm. We're doing everything we can." Stay calm? How could I stay calm when someone was trying to get into my room? I hung up in frustration, staring at the door, my mind racing for a solution. I couldn't stay locked in here forever. The knocking had stopped for now, but I could still hear movement, shuffling footsteps just outside. My eyes flicked to the window, but the view was blocked by a sheer curtain. I couldn't see anything, and the darkness outside only made the situation more unnerving. I heard the sound of a door opening down the hallway, followed by a voice calling out, "Hey, is everything okay in there?" It was a hotel staff member, but his voice sounded distant, as though he was several doors away. I rushed to the door, but before I could speak, the knocking started again, this time more forceful than before, as if whoever was on the other side had grown frustrated. I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door just a crack, peering into the hallway. To my shock, the hallway was empty. No staff, no security, no one at all. The only sound was the echo of my own breath, shallow and panicked. I stepped back, the door clicking shut behind me as I backed away, my mind reeling. The hotel was deserted, but the strange knocking had come from somewhere. I sank onto the bed, shaking. There was no one there, no one visible, at least. The front desk had confirmed that they hadn't sent anyone to my room, yet someone had been trying to get in. I wasn't sure if I could trust anything I had heard or seen anymore. My phone buzzed with an incoming message, but I couldn't bring myself to check it. Every sound in the room now seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. The hotel felt wrong, like it had been abandoned long ago, and the strange sounds were all that was left, whispers of something unsettling that I couldn't quite understand. The knocking didn't stop. Story 10. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into the gas station, the flickering lights barely cutting through the darkness. I had been driving for hours, and the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. I wanted nothing more than to stretch my legs, fill up, and get back on the road. The air felt unusually still for a late night, and the station was quiet, with no other cars around, save for one that was parked further down the lot. I stepped out of my car, the cool night air hitting me as I made my way to the pump. The hum of the fluorescent lights above me filled the silence as I started pumping the gas. I glanced around, noticing the desolate emptiness of the station, with only the distant sounds of the highway far off in the night. My focus was on the task at hand, not expecting anything unusual. That was when I heard a soft knock on the window. I looked up to see a man standing there, his face obscured by the dim light. He was wearing a worn-out jacket, and his expression was hard to read. "Your tire looks flat," he said, his voice sounding oddly calm given the situation. I frowned, confused and wary. I knew my tires were fine. I had checked them before I started my trip. I quickly shook my head, dismissing the comment. "It's not flat," I said, my voice firm, hoping that would end the conversation. I was trying to avoid any unnecessary interactions. The man stared at me for a long moment, his gaze not leaving the window. Something about the way he stood there, motionless and silent, made my skin crawl. I turned my attention back to the gas pump, hoping he would just leave. He didn't. Instead, the man walked away from my car, moving toward the one parked behind me. I watched in the side mirror as he approached the vehicle, then heard him knock on the window once again. My heart skipped a beat as I realized he was saying the exact same thing to the driver of the other car. "Your tire looks flat," he told them. I felt a strange sense of unease creeping over me. What was this man's deal? He had to know he was wrong. There was no way both of our tires were flat. I stayed in my car, trying to focus on the pump, trying to ignore the strange man. I didn't want to make a scene, but something about the way he was acting made my instincts scream that something wasn't right. The driver of the car behind me didn't respond at first. I could see him through the rearview mirror, his face obscured by the tinted windows. The man stood there for a few moments longer, then knocked again, even louder this time. He seemed relentless, as though determined to get a response. My eyes darted nervously between the gas meter and the scene unfolding outside my car. Finally, the man walked away, heading toward the store. I took a deep breath, my heart still pounding. I quickly finished pumping the gas, eager to get back in my car and drive off. But before I could even put the nozzle back in its place, the man returned. This time he didn't knock on my window, but instead he stood just a few feet away from me, watching. I tried to ignore him, hoping he would just leave. But his presence was overwhelming, and I felt my hands trembling as I reached for my wallet. The air was thick with tension. I looked around the gas station, but it was still empty, just me, the strange man, and the quiet hum of the lights above. He seemed to be waiting for something, but I had no idea what. I quickly finished paying for the gas, trying to keep my composure. As I walked back to my car, I glanced at the man one last time. He didn't move, just continued to stand there, his eyes locked on me. I could feel my pulse quicken, a sense of urgency rising within me. I wanted to get out of there, to be as far away from him as possible. I slid into my car and locked the doors, trying to shake off the strange feeling in my chest. I wasn't sure why, but I felt as though something had been off the entire time. I glanced at the other car, but the driver hadn't gotten out. The man's words still echoed in my mind. "Your tire looks flat." It didn't make sense. It wasn't just a strange observation, it felt like a warning, or even a test. Was he trying to get my attention for some reason? Was there something more to his behavior than just a random comment? I started the car and slowly pulled away, keeping my eyes on the man as I drove past. He didn't move, just stood there, watching me leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that he wasn't just some harmless passerby. The way he had circled both cars, the insistence in his voice, it felt calculated. As I turned onto the main road and picked up speed, I couldn't help but glance back in the rearview mirror. The gas station was still there, the lights flickering in the distance, but the man had disappeared. I drove for a while without speaking, the eerie silence filling the car. My mind raced, replaying the events over and over. Why had he done that? Why had he approached me and then the other driver? Was it some sort of odd coincidence? Or was there something more I hadn't seen? The further I drove, the more I convinced myself it had been a random interaction. Maybe he was just an eccentric person, harmless in his own strange way. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I had a sinking suspicion that I had just encountered someone who wasn't simply trying to help someone who had been watching and waiting for something. I didn't know what that something was, but I couldn't ignore the unsettling thought that it wasn't the last time I'd crossed paths with that man. Story 11. I was sitting on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through my phone when a message came in. The screen lit up with a notification from an unknown number, the words sending a chill down my spine. "I see you." I stared at it for a moment, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a wrong number or a prank, but something about it made my skin crawl. I hesitated before typing a response. "Who is this?" My fingers felt unsteady as I hit send, my heart thudding in my chest. The message delivered instantly, but no reply came right away. I glanced around my living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The silence of my apartment suddenly felt suffocating. A few seconds later, my phone vibrated again. My breath caught in my throat as I opened the message. It was a photo of me, sitting right there on my couch, in the exact position I was in at that moment. The blanket was draped the same way, my phone in my hand, my expression frozen in shock. The angle was slightly high, as if someone had taken it from outside my window. My blood ran cold. My first instinct was to whip my head toward the window, but the blinds were closed. There was no way someone could see in at least. That's what I told myself. My hands trembled as I held the phone, my breathing shallow. Someone was watching me. Someone was close enough to take that picture without me noticing. I stood up slowly, my body rigid with fear. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom, and I lived alone. There was no one else here. I walked over to the window and hesitated before peeking through the blinds. The parking lot below was mostly empty, a few cars scattered under the dim glow of the streetlights. There was no one there, no sign of movement. I locked my phone screen and pressed it against my chest, my mind racing. Maybe it was some kind of trick. Maybe someone had an old photo of me and was trying to scare me. But how would they know what I was doing at that exact moment? My phone vibrated again and I almost dropped it. Another message. Don't look outside. My hands went ice cold. I backed away from the window, my pulse pounding in my ears. My legs felt unsteady as I stumbled back toward the couch. Every instinct screamed at me to call someone, but I didn't know who. The police? And tell them what? That someone texted me a picture of myself. Would they even take it seriously? I opened my contacts and hovered over my best friend's name, but before I could press call, another text came through. I know you're scared. I like it. My stomach twisted, and I nearly dropped my phone. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't some random joke. Someone was watching me and they were enjoying it. I forced myself to take deep breaths, my fingers tightening around my phone. I needed to do something. My apartment had a deadbolt, a chain lock, both were secured. The only other way in was the balcony door, but I never left that unlocked. I walked over to check it anyway, my hands shaking as I tested the handle. Locked. Secure. But it didn't make me feel any safer. My phone vibrated again. I didn't want to look, but I had to. You really shouldn't have done that. My breath hitched. My eyes darted around the apartment, panic surging through me. What had I done? Checked the locks. Looked outside. My fingers hovered over the emergency dial, but before I could press it, another photo came through. It was darker this time, grainier, but I could make out the details clearly. It was my apartment door. From the hallway, my mind reeled. Whoever this was, they weren't outside anymore. They were inside the building. They were right outside my door. My body went numb with fear. I wanted to move, to run, to hide, but I was frozen in place. My ears strained to hear any sound from the hallway. The building was usually quiet at this hour, but now the silence was deafening. I stared at the door, half expecting to see the handle turn, to hear a knock. My phone vibrated again and I nearly screamed. Opened the door. A wave of nausea hit me. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to think. I needed help. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed my keys from the coffee table, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped them. My only chance was making a run for it. If they were outside my door, I'd have to be fast. Just as I reached for the chain lock, another message came through. Don't. I stopped dead in my tracks, my fingers inches from the lock. It felt like a warning, like they knew exactly what I was about to do. My entire body was trembling now, sweat breaking out along my skin. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how they were watching me. I turned back toward the living room, trying to come up with another plan, when a soft knock echoed from the door. My breath hitched, my heart slamming against my ribs. It wasn't loud, just 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The kind that told me whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. They were waiting. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes as I clutched my phone. I dialed 911 with shaky hands, pressing the call button as I backed away from the door. The ringing felt like it lasted forever before an operator finally answered. My voice was barely above a whisper as I told them someone was outside my apartment sending me pictures. The knocking stopped. My stomach twisted in dread. I held my breath, straining to listen. Silence. Then footsteps slow, fading away down the hallway. I stayed on the line with the operator, my entire body locked in fear. It felt like hours before the police finally arrived. They checked the building, but no one was there. No cameras caught anything unusual. There were no signs of forced entry, no clues left behind. Just the messages on my phone, proof that someone had been watching. They advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, maybe with a friend. As I packed a small bag, my phone vibrated one last time. My hands shook as I looked at the screen. You made the right choice, but I'll see you again soon. Story 12. The plane was already boarding when I reached my seat near the window. I settled in, placing my bag under the seat in front of me before pulling out my phone. The cabin was buzzing with quiet conversations, the occasional shuffle of luggage being stored in overhead compartments. As I buckled my seatbelt, a man took the seat next to me, dropping into it with an exhale. I glanced at him briefly, noting his dark jacket and the way his hands fidgeted with his seatbelt. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with thinning hair and a sharp, angular face. Something about him felt off, though I couldn't immediately place what it was. I turned my attention back to my phone, scrolling through my messages while waiting for takeoff. As the plane taxied down the runway, I noticed movement from the corner of my eye. The man next to me was leaning ever so slightly in my direction, his gaze fixed on my screen. I shifted uncomfortably, angling my phone away from him. He didn't seem embarrassed or apologetic. If anything, he barely reacted, as if he had every right to look. I locked my phone and stared ahead, pretending not to notice. The engines roared as we lifted off, and I tried to focus on anything but the uncomfortable awareness of my seatmate's presence. A flight attendant passed by, and I considered saying something, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he was just absent-mindedly glancing, nothing more. Minutes passed, and I unlocked my phone again, this time being extra careful to tilt the screen toward my body. Still, I felt his gaze lingering, his eyes darting between my face and the glow of my phone. My stomach twisted in discomfort. Who does that so openly? I turned slightly toward the window, hoping the shift would discourage him. The flight was long, and eventually I fell into a rhythm of checking my phone, listening to music, and staring out at the clouds. The man stayed mostly quiet, only shifting in his seat now and then. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that maybe he wasn't looking as much as I thought. But when I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye, I caught him again watching my phone, his expression unreadable. As we neared our destination, I shut my phone off and placed it in my lap, unwilling to give him anything else to see. When the plane finally landed, he didn't say a word. He simply unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, waiting for his turn to exit the row. I let out a slow breath, relieved the flight was over. By the time I made it to baggage claim, the strange encounter had already started fading from my mind. I was more focused on getting my suitcase and heading to my hotel. The airport was crowded, people moving in all directions, voices overlapping in a steady hum. I checked my phone for any notifications and felt my stomach drop. A new text had appeared from an unknown number. The message was short, only 2 words. "Nice flight, huh?" My fingers tightened around my phone as I reread the text, my pulse picking up speed. I glanced around, suddenly feeling exposed. Who had sent this? I looked through my contacts, wondering if it was a prank from someone I knew. But there was no one who would send something like that. My mind immediately went to the man on the plane, the way he had been watching me. Had he seen enough to get my number? But how? A chill crept up my spine as I turned in a slow circle, scanning the faces around me. There were too many people, too much movement. I had no way of knowing if he was still nearby. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself it could be a coincidence, a wrong number. But deep down, I didn't believe that. I grabbed my bag and made my way toward the airport exit, my heart pounding in my ears. The moment I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, but it did little to calm my nerves. I hailed a taxi, checking my phone again as I slid into the back seat. No new messages. I debated whether to reply, but something told me not to engage. The ride to my hotel felt longer than it should have. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting another message. When I finally arrived, I hurried inside, eager to get to the safety of my room. The hotel lobby was quiet, dimly lit, the front desk clerk barely glancing up as I checked in. I took the elevator to my floor, still gripping my phone tightly. As soon as I reached my room, I locked the door and double-checked the latch. Setting my suitcase down, I collapsed onto the bed, trying to shake the lingering unease. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it really was just a coincidence. Then, another message came through. "You're fast. Thought you'd stay at the airport longer." My breath caught in my throat. My hands trembled as I stared at the words. Whoever this was, they were watching me. They had seen me leave. That meant they were still nearby. I shot up from the bed and moved to the window, carefully peeking out from behind the curtain. The parking lot below was mostly empty, a few scattered cars sitting beneath the dim glow of streetlights. I couldn't see anyone, but that didn't mean they weren't there. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. I needed to do something. I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone had sent me a couple of creepy texts. They wouldn't take it seriously. My mind raced through possibilities. Could it be the man from the plane? If he had somehow gotten my number, what else did he know? Another text came in. "Room 512, right? Nice choice." My blood ran cold. My hands clenched into fists, panic surging through me. That was my room number. My throat went dry as I backed away from the window, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to knock. My breaths came fast and shallow. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk, my voice shaking as I explained that someone was harassing me. The clerk assured me they would send security to check the floor. I barely had time to process the words before another text arrived. "You shouldn't have done that." I felt my stomach drop as a loud knock sounded at my door. Story 13. I approached the ATM, my eyes scanning the area out of habit. The street was quiet, dimly lit by the flickering glow of an old street lamp. It wasn't too late, but the area had an eerie stillness to it. I had parked my car just across the lot, keeping it within sight as I withdrew cash. The machine beeped as I inserted my card, and I let out a slow breath, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. As I began typing my PIN, I sensed movement behind me. At first, I thought it was just another late-night customer, someone waiting their turn. But then I felt it, someone standing too close, their presence pressing in on me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a man, his face partially hidden by the hood of his jacket. He wasn't just behind me, he was close enough that I could hear his breathing. My fingers hesitated over the keypad. A cold wave of unease washed over me. The ATM was in an open area, but no one else was around. I forced myself to focus, quickly selecting the withdrawal amount. My pulse quickened as I felt his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze almost suffocating. The machine whirred as it dispensed the cash, and I snatched it up immediately, shoving it into my wallet. I could still feel him behind me, unmoving, waiting. I stepped away from the ATM, my grip tightening around my wallet. I expected him to step forward and take his turn, but he didn't. Instead, he lingered, his head slightly tilted as if listening to something. My heart pounded as I watched him. He raised a hand to the keypad and started pressing buttons, but there was something off. He hadn't inserted a card. The machine didn't make a sound, didn't respond to his touch. He was pretending. A cold dread settled in my stomach. He wasn't here to withdraw money. He had been watching me, waiting for something. I quickened my pace, putting as much distance between us as possible without outright running. My car was just a few steps away, but suddenly, it felt too far. The man hadn't looked up, but I could feel him watching, could sense that he wasn't done yet. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking slightly. As I reached my car, I dared to look back. The man was no longer at the ATM. He had turned slightly, his body angled as if ready to follow. My breath caught in my throat. I yanked the car door open and slid inside, locking it in one swift motion. My fingers fumbled to start the engine as I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He stood still for a moment, then took a slow step in my direction. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. My tires screeched against the pavement as I pulled out of the lot, my heart slamming against my ribs. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him running after me, but he wasn't. He was just standing there, watching as I drove away. His posture was relaxed, almost as if he had expected this, as if he knew he had already accomplished whatever he had intended. I didn't feel safe until I was miles away, pulling into a well-lit gas station to catch my breath. My hands were still trembling as I reached for my phone. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? That a man had stood too close at an ATM, that he had pretended to use the machine. It wasn't illegal to loiter, and I had no real proof of anything sinister. Still, something deep inside me screamed that it hadn't just been a coincidence. I checked my wallet, making sure everything was still there. My cash was untouched, my card still in place. But the unease didn't leave me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just escaped something worse. I replayed the moment over in my head, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he had been waiting to grab my money. Maybe he had been hoping I would drop my card, or maybe he had been after something else entirely. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I wasn't going back there. Not ever. I would find another ATM, one inside a store, somewhere safer. As I sat there trying to steady my nerves, my phone vibrated. A message from my bank. My stomach twisted as I opened it. A notification of a failed login attempt. My card hadn't been used, but someone had tried to access my account. The blood drained from my face. The man at the ATM. Had he somehow seen my PIN? Had he been watching more closely than I realized? I felt exposed, violated. I immediately called my bank, reporting the suspicious activity. They froze my account, but the damage was done. He had tried. I leaned back in my seat, my mind racing. I had been careful, hadn't I? I had shielded the keypad with my hand, hadn't I? The doubts crept in, making my skin crawl. I had never felt so targeted, so deliberately chosen. I knew without a doubt that he had been watching me long before I even noticed him. I drove home, my grip still tight on the wheel. I double-checked my locks when I got inside, my paranoia reaching new heights. I peeked out the window, half expecting to see him standing outside, waiting. The street was empty, but the fear remained. I knew I had been lucky tonight. But what if I hadn't been? What if he had done more than just watch? Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound made me jolt awake. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far. My mind wouldn't let go of the image of him standing there, pretending to use the ATM. I had this sickening feeling that it wasn't the last time I would see him. Story 14. I had agreed to house sit for a couple who were out of town for the weekend. Their home was a large, old house nestled in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees that cast long shadows as the sun set. It wasn't my first time staying there, and I had always found the place comfortable. The owners assured me there were no pets, no security concerns, and that I'd have the house to myself. The first night was peaceful, with nothing out of the ordinary. I locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and settled on the couch with a book. The silence of the house was almost calming, interrupted only by the occasional creak of the wooden floors as the house settled. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and went upstairs to the guest room, leaving the hallway light on just in case. Sometime during the night, I woke up to the faint sound of footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from the floor above. At first, I thought I might be imagining things, the remnants of a dream bleeding into reality. I held my breath and listened, hoping the noise would stop. Instead, the footsteps continued, moving toward the staircase. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. The homeowners had told me there was nothing upstairs, except for a storage space. There were no pets, no roommates, no reason for anyone to be moving around. I forced myself to sit up, my body tense as I debated whether to investigate or stay put. The sound stopped suddenly, as if whoever or whatever was walking had noticed my awareness. I told myself it had to be an old house settling, or maybe even my imagination running wild. But the sound had been too distinct, too rhythmic, to be just the house shifting. I got out of bed, my bare feet pressing against the cool floor as I stepped toward the hallway. The silence was unnerving, thick with the weight of uncertainty. I moved cautiously, flipping on the hallway light as I made my way toward the staircase. Every instinct told me to turn around, to pretend I hadn't heard anything, but I couldn't ignore the unease creeping up my spine. I reached the foot of the stairs and peered up into the darkness. The storage area door was slightly ajar, though I was sure it had been shut when I arrived. A chill ran through me as I stared at the opening, feeling a sudden pressure in the air, as if something unseen was waiting just beyond my view. I took a deep breath and climbed the steps slowly, the old wood creaking beneath my weight. Each step felt heavier than the last, my body tense with anticipation. When I reached the top, I hesitated before pushing the door open wider. The room was empty, filled only with a few old boxes and forgotten furniture covered in sheets. There was no sign of movement, no reason for the footsteps I had heard. I stepped inside cautiously, scanning every corner. The air was stale, carrying the scent of dust and aged wood. I reached for the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb was either burned out or disconnected, leaving the room dimly lit by the hallway glow behind me. My pulse quickened as I turned, suddenly feeling the overwhelming urge to leave. As I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The dust on the wooden floor had been disturbed, faint streaks of movement visible under the glow of the hallway light. My stomach twisted at the realization something had been here. The sound of footsteps hadn't been my imagination. I backed away quickly, descending the stairs with my pulse hammering in my ears. Reaching the main floor, I locked the guest room door behind me, trying to steady my breathing. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house sending waves of anxiety through me. Morning came slowly, the night stretching into what felt like an eternity. As soon as the sun rose, I forced myself to go back upstairs. In the daylight, everything looked normal again, as if the events of the night had never happened. But the disturbed dust remained, the only evidence that something or someone had been moving up there. I considered calling the homeowners but hesitated. What would I even say? That I heard footsteps in their empty house. That their storage room had been used by an unseen presence. It sounded ridiculous, even to me. Instead, I decided to go about my day as normally as possible, convincing myself it had been a one-time event. That night, however, the footsteps returned. They started faintly, barely audible at first, as though testing whether I was awake. This time, they didn't stop. They moved slowly across the ceiling, pacing back and forth in an almost deliberate manner. My body froze as I listened, gripping the blankets as if they could shield me from whatever was upstairs. I wanted to leave, to pack my things and drive away, but fear kept me rooted in place. The house was silent except for those steady, deliberate steps. Then, without warning, they stopped right above me. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with something unseen. I strained to listen, my breath shallow and uneven. A single, distinct knock sounded from the ceiling, just once. A slow, deliberate tap directly above where I lay. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might stop entirely. I bolted upright, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. I didn't care if I sounded paranoid. I was getting out of there. Fumbling with the door handle, I flung it open and rushed down the hall, my pulse racing. I didn't bother turning off the lights or checking behind me. My only goal was to leave, to escape whatever presence lurked in that house. I grabbed my keys, threw open the front door, and stepped into the cool night air, gasping as though I had been holding my breath for hours. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. The house stood still behind me, dark and silent, yet I felt watched. I waited until the first light of morning before gathering my things, refusing to step back inside until it was absolutely necessary. When the homeowners returned, I kept my explanation brief, mentioning only that I had heard strange noises. They exchanged a look but said nothing, only nodding with a tight-lipped expression. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see something in the upstairs window. The curtains were still, the house as quiet as it had been when I arrived. But even as I put distance between myself and that place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone in that house. Not once. Story 15. The subway car was nearly empty, just a few scattered passengers lost in their own worlds. The rhythmic clatter of the train against the tracks filled the silence, a steady, familiar sound that had always been comforting. I was tired, eager to get home after a long day, barely paying attention to the people around me. Then a voice, low and urgent, whispered close to my ear. "And get off at the next stop if you want to be safe." The words sent a chill down my spine. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see the man sitting beside me. He looked ordinary, worn jeans, a dark hoodie, unshaven, but there was something unsettling about him. His face was unreadable, his eyes locked on the opposite side of the train. I wanted to ignore him, chalk it up to some strange prank or the ramblings of an unstable passenger. But the way he said it, the weight behind his words, made my pulse quicken. I glanced around, suddenly hyper-aware of my surroundings. The other passengers seemed oblivious, lost in books, headphones, or blank stares into nothingness. I swallowed hard. Maybe it was paranoia, but something told me to listen. As the train began to slow, my heart pounded against my ribs. The station name flashed past the window, just another routine stop on the route. I hesitated, debating whether I was about to make a mistake. Then, at the last second, I stood up and stepped off the train. The doors slid shut behind me, and I exhaled. Relief lasted only a moment before I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there he was. The man had gotten off too. He stood just a few feet away, hands in his pockets, watching me. The station was mostly empty, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, eerie shadows. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. I stepped toward the exit, trying to act natural, as if I wasn't unnerved. Maybe he was just another passenger heading the same way. That's what I told myself, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I walked briskly toward the stairs, avoiding eye contact, feeling his gaze burn into my back. My fingers hovered over my phone in my pocket, ready to call someone if needed. Footsteps echoed behind me, steady, intentional. I quickened my pace, my breath coming faster. The station was nearly deserted, just a distant station worker behind a glass window and the occasional passerby. I debated running but forced myself to stay composed. If I ran, it might escalate things. If I acted like I wasn't afraid, maybe he'd lose interest. At the top of the stairs, I glanced back. He was still there, matching my pace, his expression unreadable. My stomach twisted. I veered toward the exit, hoping to lose him in the streets, where there would be more people, more places to go. The city was never truly empty, even at this hour. The moment I stepped outside, cold air hit my face, sharp and sobering. The street was dimly lit, a few late-night commuters and taxis rolling by. I turned sharply, weaving between pedestrians, hoping to blend in. My heart pounded, but I refused to look back. If I did, I knew I'd see him. I moved quickly, ducking into a convenience store on the corner. The bright fluorescent lights and hum of a radio provided a false sense of safety. I pretended to browse, stealing glances toward the entrance. A minute passed, then two. Just when I thought I'd lost him, he appeared in the doorway. Panic flared in my chest. He didn't enter, just stood there, watching. I gripped my phone, ready to call for help. The cashier barely glanced up, unaware of the tension thickening the air. I weighed my options. Confront him, ask for help, run. Every instinct screamed that I needed to get out of here, but I didn't know where to go. Then something unexpected happened. Another man entered the store, older, dressed in a security guard's uniform. His presence seemed to break whatever spell held the scene in place. The man in the hoodie turned and walked away without a word, disappearing into the night. I waited, muscles tense, before cautiously stepping outside. The street was empty except for the occasional passing car. My pulse still raced, but I forced myself to breathe. Was he really gone? Or was he waiting somewhere else? I started walking again, faster this time, scanning every alley, every shadow. Reaching a busier street, I spotted a taxi and waved it down, practically throwing myself inside. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, raising an eyebrow. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated before nodding. I gave him my address, and the car pulled away. As we drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following in another car, lurking on the sidewalk. But there was nothing. Just empty streets and the occasional neon glow of late-night diners. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something. When I finally reached my apartment, I double-checked the locks 3 times before allowing myself to breathe. The silence inside felt heavier than usual. My mind replayed everything: the whisper on the train, the way he followed, the way he left so suddenly. None of it made sense. Why did he tell me to get off? Was he trying to warn me? Or was he setting something up? The possibilities churned in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. Maybe I had avoided something worse by leaving that train. Or maybe I had walked straight into whatever he wanted me to. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every sound outside made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept my phone within reach, just in case. Morning didn't bring much comfort either. The city moved on as if nothing had happened, but I felt different, like I had brushed up against something dark and unknowable. Days passed, and I tried to put it behind me, but the unease never fully faded. I found myself watching over my shoulder more often, avoiding the subway whenever I could. I checked my apartment locks constantly, feeling a lingering paranoia I couldn't shake. Then, one night, as I walked home, I passed by a glass storefront and caught a reflection in the window. A man in a dark hoodie, just far enough behind me to be unnoticed if I hadn't looked. My stomach dropped. Duh. I turned sharply, but by the time I did, he was gone. Story 16. I flipped through a rack of sweaters, running my fingers over the soft fabric. The store was quiet, just the occasional murmur of customers and the faint hum of music playing through the speakers. Shopping had always been a way for me to unwind, a small escape from the outside world. I moved to another section, browsing through jackets, when I noticed an employee walking toward me. She was young, probably around my age, with a concerned look in her eyes. Her voice was low when she spoke, as if she didn't want anyone else to hear. "That man in the hat keeps watching you. Do you know him?" Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt my body tense before I even turned to look. I hesitated before glancing over my shoulder, scanning the store. Near the entrance, A man stood by a display of jeans, his hands in his pockets. He wore a dark hat pulled low over his face, but even from where I stood, I could feel his gaze locked on me. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach, and I quickly turned back to the employee. "No," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I don't know him." She bit her lip, glancing at him again before looking back at me. "He's been standing there for a while. Every time you move, he shifts too. It's like he's following you." My heartbeat quickened at her words. I had been so lost in my own thoughts that I hadn't even noticed. The thought made my skin crawl. I forced myself to stay calm, not wanting to panic just yet. "Has he done anything?" I asked, my fingers tightening around the sleeve of the jacket I was holding. The employee shook her head. "No, but it's weird. If you want, I can call security or something." I considered it for a moment, but part of me didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. "I'll keep an eye on him," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If he follows me when I leave, then I'll do something." The employee didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "Okay, just be careful." She gave me one last concerned glance before walking back toward the register. I took a slow breath and turned my attention back to shopping, but my mind wasn't on clothes anymore. I forced myself to move naturally, picking up a shirt and pretending to inspect it. Every few moments I stole glances toward the man. He hadn't moved from his spot, but he was still watching me. I could feel it, the weight of his stare pressing against my skin like something tangible. I tried to think. Had I seen him before? Was he someone I had passed on the street? No matter how hard I searched my memory, nothing about him felt familiar. Deciding to test him, I slowly made my way toward the dressing rooms. If he followed, then I'd know for sure. I weaved between racks, pretending to browse, but my nerves were on high alert. When I reached the back of the store, I casually turned my head. My stomach dropped. The man had moved. He was now standing closer, near a rack of coats, his body angled toward me. My pulse pounded in my ears. This wasn't a coincidence. He was definitely following me. Panic crept into my chest, and I struggled to think clearly. Should I confront him? Should I call someone? My mind raced with possibilities, but before I could decide, I noticed something else. His lips were moving. He was saying something under his breath, barely audible from where I stood. I strained to hear, my curiosity battling my fear. But then, as if he realized I was trying to listen, he abruptly stopped. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. My breath caught in my throat. Something about it sent ice through my veins. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't normal. It was the kind of smile that made your instincts scream at you to run. I turned on my heel and walked briskly toward the register. The employee from earlier saw me approaching, her eyes widening slightly. "He moved," I whispered, keeping my voice low. He followed me to the back. Her expression hardened, and she quickly picked up a phone from behind the counter. "I'm calling security." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As she spoke into the phone, I chanced another glance toward the man. My heart nearly stopped. He was gone. The space where he had been standing was empty, like he had vanished into thin air. I swallowed hard, scanning the store, but there was no sign of him. "He's not there anymore," I murmured. The employee frowned, hanging up the phone. "Security's on the way. Do you want someone to walk you to your car?" I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "Yes, please." She gestured for another employee to take over at the register before stepping out from behind the counter. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's get you out of here." We walked toward the exit together, my eyes darting around the store. half expecting the man to reappear, but he didn't. As we stepped outside, the cool air did little to ease my nerves. My car was parked near the entrance, and I felt a little safer with the employee beside me. But as we reached my car, I caught a glimpse of something in the distance. Across the parking lot, near the tree line, a dark figure stood partially hidden in the shadows. The hat, the stance, it was him. I froze, gripping my keys so tightly they dug into my palm. He wasn't inside anymore, but he was still watching, still waiting. The employee followed my gaze, her face paling. "Get in your car," she whispered urgently. Now, I didn't hesitate. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking as I yanked the door open. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors instantly. The employee stood by my car until I started the engine. "Go straight home," she said firmly. "And if he follows, don't stop. Go somewhere safe." I nodded, my heart hammering against my ribs. With one last glance at the man in the distance, I pulled out of the parking lot, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove away, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see headlights trailing me. But there was nothing, just the empty road stretching ahead. I wanted to believe it was over, that the man would disappear from my life just as suddenly as he had appeared. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. That smile, that unshakable stare, I had a terrible feeling that this wasn't the last time I'd see him. Story 17. The waiting room was quiet except for the occasional cough and the low hum of a television mounted in the corner. I sat in one of the stiff chairs, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone, trying to pass the time. A few other people were scattered around, some flipping through old magazines, others staring at the floor, waiting for their name to be called. The fluorescent lighting cast a harsh glow over everything, making the room feel even more sterile than it already was. I shifted in my seat, glancing up briefly, and that's when I saw him. A man sitting directly across from me, holding his phone at an angle that didn't seem right. His eyes flicked up from his screen to meet mine for a split second before darting back down. Something about the way he was holding his phone made me uneasy. It wasn't the casual way someone would text or scroll, it was tilted just enough that the camera could be pointed at me. My stomach twisted as I tried to convince myself I was overthinking. Maybe he was just looking at something else. Maybe it was just the way he was holding it. I looked down at my own phone, pretending to be occupied while keeping him in my peripheral vision. A few moments later, I glanced up again, and this time I caught him. His phone was still angled in my direction, and his thumb moved on the screen as if he had just taken a picture. A wave of unease washed over me. I felt my face grow hot, my hands suddenly clammy. I shifted in my seat, hoping maybe I was wrong, but deep down I knew I wasn't. The realization made my skin crawl. My heartbeat quickened as I debated what to do. But should I say something? Should I just get up and leave? My name hadn't been called yet, and I didn't want to make a scene, but the idea of him taking pictures of me made my stomach churn. I decided to test him. I moved slightly to the left in my chair, pretending to adjust my bag. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him tilt his phone ever so slightly, keeping me in frame. That was it. That was proof. He was taking pictures of me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm, but my body was tense with discomfort. I debated taking my own phone out and pretending to take a picture of him in return. Maybe that would make him stop. But the thought of engaging with him in any way made my skin crawl. Instead, I shifted again, crossing my arms over my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I could feel his gaze flicker up every now and then, watching me, waiting for my reaction. A receptionist walked through the room, calling out a name, and I silently prayed it would be mine. But when it wasn't, I felt stuck, trapped in this silent standoff. I could get up and move to another seat, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. He had already taken the pictures. Moving wouldn't erase that. My mind raced with possibilities. What was he doing with them? Was he going to post them somewhere? Send them to someone? The thought made my skin prickle with fear. I took a slow breath and decided to act. I gripped my phone tightly and quickly opened the camera. With my heart pounding, I tilted it up and snapped a picture of him before he could react. The shutter sound was off, but I saw the subtle change in his expression. He knew. He had been caught. His body stiffened, and for a split second, he looked like he was debating what to do next. His eyes flicked to mine, then to my phone, and then he quickly looked away, as if pretending none of it had happened. He shifted in his seat, angling his body away from me, suddenly interested in something else on his screen. But I saw the way his fingers hesitated, how he seemed unsure of what to do now that he knew I was aware. I didn't let my gaze drop. I wanted him to know that I wasn't afraid to call him out if I had to. My grip on my phone tightened, ready to take another picture if needed. I saw him glance at me again, this time more nervous, as if waiting to see what I would do next. The power dynamic had shifted, and he didn't seem to like it. Minutes passed in silence, but they felt like hours. My heart was still racing, but I refused to let him see that I was shaken. I just kept my phone in my lap, my camera app still open, ready. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a small breath, put his phone in his pocket, and stood up. Without a word, he walked toward the exit, his pace brisk, almost hurried. I watched him go, my muscles still tense. I waited until he was out of sight before finally exhaling, my whole body deflating with relief. My hands were shaking slightly as I unlocked my phone and looked at the picture I had taken. It was clear enough. His face was slightly turned, but it was him. I saved it immediately, unsure of what to do with it, but knowing that I needed to keep it. My mind raced with what had just happened. I had no idea who he was or why he had been taking pictures of me. I didn't know if I was overreacting, but I also knew that the pit in my stomach hadn't been lying. Something about him had been off. I debated showing the receptionist, but what would they do? He was already gone. My name was finally called and I stood up, still feeling uneasy. As I walked to the back, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to still be there. But he wasn't. He was gone, just like that, disappearing into the world as if nothing had happened. But for me, something had happened. I had seen it. I had felt it. And no matter how much I tried to push it away, the image of him sitting there, quietly taking pictures of me, would stay in my mind for a long time. Story 18. I had been working late into the night, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into my bones. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was a hot meal delivered straight to my door. I opened the food delivery app, ordered my usual, and settled onto the couch, hoping to relax for a while. As I scrolled through my phone, trying to distract myself, the familiar ding of the delivery app sounded. The message was short and simple: "Your driver has arrived." I glanced at the clock, surprised to see it was earlier than I expected. My food usually took longer, but I figured the driver might have been nearby. Eager to eat, I stood up, stretched, and headed for the door, only to stop abruptly when I noticed something strange. Outside my window there was nothing. No car in the driveway, no lights shining from a vehicle, just the emptiness of the night. I stepped closer to the door, wondering if perhaps the driver had parked a little further down the street. I checked my phone again, the screen still displaying the same message. I felt a slight unease creep into my thoughts. Was I imagining it? Could the driver have left without me seeing? I opened the door, stepped outside, and looked up and down the street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with no sign of a car anywhere. My pulse quickened as I walked further out, my eyes scanning the darkened road. There was no one in sight, no headlights glimmering in the distance. Only the faint hum of distant traffic in the far-off background. I stepped back toward the door, confused, my mind racing. I checked the app again, but there was no new message. The delivery had been confirmed, and the driver had supposedly arrived. But where were they? I called the number listed for the delivery service, but after several rings, the call went to voicemail. Frustration began to bubble up inside me. This didn't make sense. I checked the address on the app to make sure everything was correct, and it matched my own. Pacing back inside, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The message had said the driver had arrived, but they weren't here. Maybe there had been some sort of mistake, or perhaps it was some weird glitch in the system. But why had the app sent me that message if the driver wasn't here? I tried to push it from my mind, reminding myself that sometimes these things just happened. Maybe the driver had been in the area but had parked too far for me to see, or perhaps they had already left for some reason. Still, the silence outside gnawed at me, the empty street stretching out before me like a dark, uninviting void. I decided to wait for a few minutes, hoping the driver would show up, or at least send me some clarification. Minutes passed, and I found myself standing at the door, still looking out into the darkness. I kept checking the app, but there were no new notifications. No sign of life from the driver, no apology or explanation. Only the quiet of the night. The weight of my frustration grew heavier as I stepped back inside, my thoughts spinning. I didn't know what to make of it, but I didn't want to keep standing around outside either. I shut the door behind me and decided to call customer service, hoping for some answers. After several minutes on hold, a cheerful voice finally picked up. I explained the situation, how I had received the message that the driver had arrived but had found nothing when I went outside. "Oh, that's strange," the woman on the phone said, her voice sounding slightly confused. "We don't have any issues with the order, and everything looks fine on our end. Let me check with the driver and get back to you." I thanked her, but my unease only deepened as the minutes ticked by. I walked to the kitchen to try and distract myself. I opened the refrigerator, then shut it again, unable to focus. The strange message from the delivery app continued to linger in my mind. I tried to reason with myself there must be an explanation. Maybe I had missed the car, or it was just a mistake. Yet the silence outside was unbearable, and the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. I kept the phone in my hand, hoping for an update, but nothing came. Just when I was about to put the phone down in frustration, there was a knock at the door. I jumped, my heart skipping a beat, before I quickly walked over and peeked through the peephole. There was no one standing there. I opened the door cautiously, but the porch was empty. I stepped out, scanning the yard and the street, but it was as if the world had fallen into a deeper silence. I checked my phone again, but there was still no update. I felt a chill in the air, a creeping sense of dread that I couldn't shake. Who had knocked on the door? Why was there no one here? The app still hadn't changed, and there were no other messages. The weight of the situation settled heavily on my chest as I realized I might never get an answer. The night felt longer now, stretched out before me like an endless void, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Where was my food? Who had sent the message? And why had it all felt so off? I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me, and sank into the couch. The silence was overwhelming, and the weight of the unanswered question hung heavily in the air. The message on my phone had promised the driver had arrived, but all that remained was a mystery. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't want to know what came next. Story 19. The streets were nearly empty as I walked home, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the sidewalk, making everything feel distorted. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the night air colder than I had expected. The silence was almost comforting, until I heard another set of footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, my stomach twisting at the sight of a man walking a short distance away. He wasn't too close, but close enough that I noticed him. He wore dark clothing, his face shadowed beneath the dim light. I quickened my pace, hoping he was just another late-night pedestrian heading home. The footsteps matched mine, keeping in sync no matter how fast I walked. My pulse picked up, a familiar unease settling in my chest. I told myself I was overreacting, that he just happened to be going the same way. But then he spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. "You dropped something." I didn't slow down, didn't even glance back. I knew for a fact I hadn't dropped anything. My bag was zipped, my hands were empty, and there was nothing on the ground in front of me. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to pretend I hadn't heard him. He said it again, louder this time. "You dropped something." His voice was sharper now, edged with something that sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just a statement, it was a demand. He wanted me to stop, to acknowledge him, and I refused. I crossed the street, hoping to put distance between us. My heart pounded as I listened for his reaction. The footsteps hesitated for a second, then resumed quicker than before. I could feel his presence behind me, closer now, his energy shifting from passive to insistent. I reached into my pocket, gripping my phone, but I didn't want to stop long enough to call someone. My apartment was only a few blocks away, and I just needed to make it there. I kept my head down, focusing on each step, counting them like they were the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Then he shouted. "Hey," I said, "you dropped something." His voice was thick with anger now, the kind that sent adrenaline surging through my veins. It wasn't about a dropped item anymore, this was about control. He wanted a reaction, and I wasn't going to give him one. I turned down a side street, hoping to lose him. My mind raced through every self-defense tip I had ever heard. I'd go home if someone's following you. Find a public place. Make noise. But there was no one else around, no shops open this late. Just darkened houses with sleeping occupants who wouldn't hear me if I screamed. The footsteps grew faster, more deliberate, and I knew he was closing in. Panic clawed at my throat as I forced myself to stay calm. I spotted a gas station ahead, its fluorescent lights flickering in the distance. If I could just get there, I might be safe. I picked up my pace, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The man's footsteps did the same, matching mine, and I could hear the weight of his movements bearing down on me. I felt trapped in a nightmare, the kind where you run but don't seem to move fast enough. Just as I reached the gas station parking lot, I heard him curse under his breath. I risked a glance back and saw him slow down, his face twisting with something unreadable. He hesitated at the edge of the sidewalk, as if reconsidering his next move. I pushed through the gas station doors, the bright fluorescent lights almost blinding after the dim streets. The cashier, a bored-looking guy in his 20s, barely glanced up from his phone. I forced myself to breathe, acting as if nothing was wrong, but my hands were shaking as I grabbed a random snack from the shelf. Through the glass doors, I saw the man standing outside, watching me. His posture was stiff, his head tilted slightly, as if deciding whether or not to follow. My stomach churned at the thought of him waiting for me to come back out. I walked straight to the counter, my voice as steady as I could manage. "Hey, can I stay here for a bit? There's a guy outside who was following me." The cashier finally looked up, his expression shifting to mild concern as he glanced outside. He leaned over the counter, eyes narrowing at the man still loitering near the entrance. "You know him?" he asked. "No," I said, gripping the counter. He kept saying I dropped something, but I didn't. He followed me for blocks. The cashier muttered something under his breath, then reached for the phone. "I'll call the cops. Just stay here." I nodded, my pulse still racing. The man outside seemed to realize what was happening. His gaze flicked between me and the cashier, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the empty street. The cashier kept me company until the police arrived, his presence reassuring even though he didn't say much. When the officers showed up, they took my statement and walked me home, checking the streets for any sign of the man. But he was gone, vanished as if he had never been there. I locked my door the moment I stepped inside, every nerve still on edge. My apartment, usually a place of comfort, felt vulnerable. I replayed the encounter over and over, wondering what would have happened if I had stopped when he first called out to me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound outside made my skin crawl. Every creak of the building sent my heart racing. I knew I had done the right thing by ignoring him, by getting to safety. But the memory of his voice, sharp with anger, echoed in my mind long after he was gone. Story 20. The red light stretched on longer than usual, or at least it felt that way. I sat in my car, waiting for it to turn green, my fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. The streets were mostly empty, just a few cars in the distance and the occasional pedestrian walking along the sidewalk. The night was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the stillness. A sudden blaring horn cut through the silence, jolting me out of my thoughts. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a car directly behind me, their headlights glaring into my back window. The driver was honking aggressively, their impatience radiating through the short bursts of sound. I checked the light again, but it was still red. There was no reason for them to be honking. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, unsure of what to do. It wasn't like I could move forward. Traffic laws existed for a reason. The honking continued, growing more relentless, like the driver expected me to run the red light just to accommodate their urgency. My grip on the wheel tightened as I tried to ignore the noise. The light turned green a moment later, and I pressed the gas pedal, relieved to finally get away. Before I could even gain speed, the car behind me swerved sharply to the side and sped past. My heart skipped as I caught a glimpse of the driver, someone leaning halfway out of the open window, phone in hand. The quick flashes of light from their screen confirmed what I saw. They were taking pictures of me. My stomach dropped as I tried to process what was happening. It didn't make sense. Why would someone go through the trouble of honking like that just to pass me and take pictures? I felt my pulse quicken, my hands gripping the wheel a little tighter. The car sped ahead, weaving between the sparse traffic before disappearing around a corner. I kept driving, my mind racing as I replayed the scene over and over. Maybe I had imagined it, maybe they were taking pictures of something else. But the way they had leaned out, phone angled towards me, left little room for doubt. I turned onto a quieter road, hoping to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The city lights flickered outside my window, but I barely noticed them. A few minutes later, I saw headlights in my rearview mirror again. At first, I didn't think much of it, just another car on the road, nothing unusual. But as I kept driving, I noticed the vehicle wasn't passing me. It was keeping pace, maintaining a steady distance behind me. A cold prickle crept up my spine as I realized it looked like the same car from before. I turned onto another street, trying to see if they would follow. They did. My breath hitched slightly as I pressed the gas, speeding up just enough to put some distance between us. But no matter what turns I made, they stayed behind me. My heart pounded against my ribs as the eerie reality set in. They weren't just another driver, they were following me. I tried to keep calm, thinking through my options. Stopping wasn't an option. I didn't want to pull into my driveway and let them know where I lived. Instead, I decided to head towards a more populated area, somewhere with plenty of witnesses. I turned onto a main road, the bright lights of a convenience store up ahead giving me a sense of relief. As I pulled into the parking lot, I kept an eye on my mirror. The car slowed but didn't pull in after me. Instead, it idled at the entrance, as if debating their next move. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe they had given up, maybe they weren't following me after all. But then, after a long moment, the car crept forward before finally driving off. I stayed in my car for a few minutes, my fingers shaking slightly as I reached for my phone. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone honked at me, took pictures, and followed me for a bit. It wasn't exactly a crime, but it was enough to make me feel deeply unsettled. Instead, I texted a friend, letting them know what had happened, just in case. After some time, I finally convinced myself it was safe to drive home. The roads felt emptier than before, the night stretching on in eerie silence. I kept glancing at my mirrors, half expecting to see those same headlights again, but nothing appeared. No cars followed. By the time I reached my neighborhood, I was exhausted but still on edge. I parked in my driveway, sitting in my car for a moment before getting out. The street was quiet, just the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. I walked up to my front door, still feeling the weight of unease in my chest. As I unlocked it, I cast one last glance at the road behind me. Nothing, just empty pavement and darkness. Inside, I locked the door behind me, double-checking it before stepping further inside. The house felt different tonight, too quiet, too still. I tossed my keys onto the counter, trying to shake the feeling that I had been watched. My phone buzzed on the table, and I hesitated before picking it up. A new notification. My breath caught in my throat as I opened it. An unknown number had sent me a message. No text, just an image. My car, taken from behind. The same angle someone would have from inside another car. I stared at it, my heart thudding so loudly I could barely hear my own breathing. The picture had been taken tonight. Story 21. The night air was crisp as I pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of the self-storage facility. The only sounds were the faint hum of the security lights above and the soft crunch of gravel beneath my tires. I had been here many times before, but tonight something felt different. There was an eerie stillness to the place, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I parked my car near the back and made my way toward the row of storage units. I had come to retrieve a few boxes I'd been meaning to sort through for months. My life had been busy, and the boxes had sat untouched, buried in the back of the unit. I unlocked the gate and pulled open the heavy door to my storage unit, the old metal groaning in protest. The faint smell of dust and cardboard filled my nostrils as I stepped inside. It was just as I remembered, dimly lit, rows upon rows of metal doors, most of them tightly shut, their contents hidden behind the rusted steel. I grabbed a few boxes and made my way out, the door clicking shut behind me. It was then that I heard it. A creak, faint but distinct, coming from one of the units further down the row. I stopped, listening intently. The sound was unmistakable. Another storage unit door had opened. But that couldn't be right. I was the only one here. The parking lot was empty, and the place had been quiet when I arrived. My heart began to race as I glanced around the darkened facility. The dim lights cast long shadows on the rows of storage units, making it difficult to see far ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but the parking lot remained empty, the only movement coming from the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The creaking door sounded again, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a shiver down my spine. I froze in place, staring down the row of units. There was no one else here. Or at least there shouldn't have been. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or the building settling. Self-storage units were old, and the doors weren't always properly maintained. But the sound persisted, faint but constant, as if someone was moving through the rows of units. I hesitated for a moment before I decided to investigate. Maybe it was a late-night worker, though I couldn't recall ever seeing anyone here at this hour. I grabbed the boxes and walked cautiously down the row, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I moved closer to the source of the sound, the door creaked again, louder this time. It was coming from the unit at the end of the row, the furthest one from the parking lot. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, every muscle in my body on high alert. I couldn't see anyone, but the door was slightly ajar, just enough for a sliver of darkness to be visible. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, wondering if I should call out, but something kept me silent. It was as though my instincts were warning me to stay quiet, to not draw attention to myself. I glanced back toward the entrance of the facility, my mind racing. No one else was there. My car was parked alone under the security light, and the surrounding area was still and silent. I should have just left, but something about the open door beckoned me, and I found myself stepping closer. With each step, the air seemed to grow colder, the night pressing in on me from all sides. The creaking noise continued, a rhythmic sound that seemed to match the thudding of my heartbeat. I reached the unit and stood in front of it for a moment, trying to gather the courage to push the door open further. The dim light above flickered, casting brief shadows across the ground. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I reached out slowly, my fingers brushing the cold metal of the door, and pushed. The door gave way with a soft groan, revealing the darkness inside. The unit appeared empty, just a few scattered boxes and an old, dusty chair pushed against the far wall. There was no sign of anyone or anything out of the ordinary. I stepped back, confused. The sound had stopped, but then, without warning, I heard something else: footsteps. Faint, deliberate steps, coming from deeper inside the facility. The footsteps didn't sound like they were coming from outside, they were closer, almost as if they were coming from behind me. My pulse quickened, and I turned around, scanning the row of units, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just the darkness stretching out before me. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving the shadows. The footsteps grew louder, closer now, but there was no one in sight. Panic surged through me, and I spun on my heels, heading back toward the exit. I needed to get out of here, but as I turned, I felt a cold draft of air brush against my face. The door of the unit I had just passed was wide open now, and I could see someone moving inside. I froze. The figure was barely visible, just a shadow moving within the dim interior of the unit. My mind screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure stepped into the sliver of light from the overhead bulb, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a face, a pale, gaunt face staring at me through the darkness. I blinked, and the figure was gone, as if it had vanished into the shadows. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran for the exit, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps followed, echoing behind me. The sound of them grew louder, faster, as if whoever or whatever was chasing me was closing in. I reached my car, fumbled for my keys, and unlocked the door with trembling hands. I slammed the door shut and sped out of the parking lot, the eerie silence of the facility still lingering in my mind. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But the road behind me was empty. The storage facility was gone, fading into the distance as I put miles between myself and the haunting sound of creaking doors and unseen footsteps. Story 22. I had agreed to pet sit for my friend, Olivia, while she was out of town for the weekend. She was always meticulous about her house, and I knew she trusted me to take care of everything. Her cat, Muffin, was usually shy but warmed up to me after a few hours. I spent the evening feeding her and playing with her before settling in on the couch to watch TV. The house was quiet, peaceful, exactly what I needed after a busy week. Around midnight, I decided to clean up a bit. As I bent down to pick up a stray sock that had fallen under the couch, my hand brushed against something hard. Curious, I reached further back and felt a small, smooth object. I pulled it out, thinking it was a remote or an old toy, but my heart skipped when I saw what it was. A hidden camera. It was tucked behind the couch's fabric, cleverly disguised to blend in with the dust and furniture. I stared at the camera for a moment, the reality of the situation starting to settle in. Why would Olivia have a hidden camera? I immediately thought of all the possible reasons, none of which made sense to me. She was always open about everything, and I'd never felt like she had anything to hide. But this camera was not just an afterthought, it was well placed, with a clear view of the front door. My mind raced, and I suddenly felt very exposed in the quiet house. I placed the camera down on the coffee table, feeling a bit shaken. Muffin, who had been lounging nearby, jumped up on the couch and started nudging my hand. I absent-mindedly stroked her fur, trying to calm my nerves. My eyes kept darting to the camera, wondering if it had been recording while I was here. Had it captured me as I moved around the house? Had it been watching me all along? The more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. I decided to text Olivia. She had always been open about her life, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, but I didn't know how to ask about something so invasive. What if I was misinterpreting the situation? I couldn't bring myself to send a message asking about a hidden camera, so I put my phone down and made a decision. I'd confront her about it in person when she returned. As I went to put the camera back, I realized something unsettling. The angle it had been pointed at wasn't random. It had a clear line of sight to the front door, almost as if it were designed to capture anyone who entered the house. But Olivia had never mentioned anything about security issues. I thought back to the many times I had visited her house, always feeling welcome and safe. Now, I wasn't so sure. I kept Muffin company for the rest of the night, trying to shake off the unease. I couldn't stop thinking about the camera, about whether Olivia had been watching me or if there was something I was missing. Had she installed it recently? Was there a specific reason she felt the need to monitor the front door? I searched for answers, but my mind was filled with more questions. The next morning, I decided to leave the camera where it was and take Muffin for a walk to clear my head. I needed a break from the house, from the feeling that something was off. The fresh air outside did little to ease my mind. As I strolled through the park, I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following me. The more I thought about the camera, the more I wondered if Olivia had been watching me this entire time. When I returned to the house, I noticed that something had changed. The front door, which I had locked earlier, was slightly ajar. My heart skipped a beat as I stood frozen on the doorstep. I hadn't noticed anyone coming or going while I was out, but now the door was open. I hesitated before stepping inside, scanning the room for any signs of someone else. The house seemed unchanged, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I checked the camera again, wondering if it had captured anything while I was gone. There was no way to view the footage, as the camera wasn't connected to anything obvious. I searched the house for any sort of recording device or way to access the footage, but found nothing. The camera sat there, silently mocking me with its presence. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, caught between the suspicion that something strange was going on and the desire to believe that I was overreacting. Later that day, Olivia called to check in. I had planned to ask her about the camera, but when I heard her voice, I froze. She sounded completely normal, not like someone who had been hiding secrets or monitoring me. I struggled to keep the conversation light, pretending that everything was fine. But as we talked, my mind kept returning to the camera and the thought that she might be watching me through it. When she returned home that evening, I was waiting on the couch, feeling more anxious than ever. I had to ask her about the camera, but I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid. As soon as she walked in, I tried to smile and act casual, but she immediately noticed the camera on the coffee table. Her face went pale, and she slowly sat down across from me. "I'm sorry you found it," she said quietly, her eyes avoiding mine. "I didn't want you to see it like this." My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to her explain. Olivia admitted that she had installed the camera because she had been receiving threatening messages from an unknown source. She didn't want to worry me, so she kept it hidden. She had been checking the footage herself, hoping to catch the person responsible. I was relieved but also disturbed. I never imagined that the camera had been put there for protection, not surveillance. As she talked, I realized how little I knew about the dangers she had been facing. But the more I listened, the more questions arose. If she had been receiving threats, why hadn't she told me? Why hide something so important? We spent the rest of the evening talking it through, but the camera remained in the back of my mind. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like it was holding secrets. The feeling of unease lingered, and though I understood Olivia's reasoning, I couldn't shake the thought that there were still things left unsaid. Story 23. The parking garage was eerily quiet as I walked down the dimly lit aisle. The only sound was the soft echo of my footsteps bouncing off the cold concrete walls. It was late, well past midnight, and I had just finished a long day at work. The garage was nearly empty, save for a few cars parked far down the rows. I had parked at the far end, where the lights flickered and the air felt thick, like it hadn't been disturbed for hours. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, focusing on the steady rhythm of my feet as they tapped against the concrete. It was a familiar sound, something I had become accustomed to during the countless late-night shifts at the office, but tonight felt different. The silence around me seemed unnaturally heavy, pressing in from every direction. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one in sight. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was just tired. But then, as I reached the end of the aisle, I heard a second set of footsteps mirroring my own. My heart skipped a beat. I stopped abruptly, and the footsteps behind me stopped as well. I turned around slowly, expecting to see someone close behind, but the aisle remained empty. The sudden silence was deafening. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, and my breath quickened. Was I imagining it? I took a cautious step forward, and once again I heard the footsteps behind me. They were perfectly in sync with my own. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I stopped once more. The echo of my footsteps lingered for a moment before falling silent, but there was something off about it. It was as if the other person, if they even existed, was waiting for me to make the first move. I slowly turned back around, facing the long stretch of the parking garage, trying to force my mind to remain calm. The shadows between the parked cars seemed deeper than they should have been, and the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead only added to the eerie atmosphere. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. I walked a few more steps, determined not to let my fear get the best of me. But when the footsteps followed again, I froze in my tracks. This time, the sound of the steps was louder, closer. I could almost feel the presence of the person behind me, as if they were standing just out of sight. I quickly glanced over my shoulder again, but still, there was nothing there. My pulse quickened, and I forced myself to take another step. The footsteps followed. This time I didn't stop. My instincts screamed at me to move faster, to get out of the garage as quickly as possible. My legs felt heavy, my body tense as I pushed myself forward, but the footsteps were getting closer. Every time I picked up the pace, the steps behind me matched my speed. It was as if someone was following me step for step, mirroring my every movement. My breath came in short gasps as I reached the next row of cars. I glanced around, looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. The parking garage felt endless, the rows of cars stretching on in all directions. My car was at the far end, but the thought of walking that distance with someone so close behind me made my skin crawl. I needed to make it to the exit, but the footsteps were relentless, echoing in my ears, growing louder with each passing second. I turned down another row, hoping to lose them in the shadows. But as I reached the next corner, the footsteps were still there, following my every move. The person behind me was no longer trying to hide, no longer waiting for me to make the first move. They were right there, so close I could feel their presence. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps followed, now matching my speed exactly. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my veins, my body fueled by sheer panic. I reached the end of the row and spotted the stairwell leading to the exit. But when I turned to head towards it, the footsteps didn't stop. They were still right behind me, too close. I could almost feel the breath on the back of my neck, the heat of someone standing just a few feet away. My stomach twisted, and I ran faster, my legs screaming in protest. As I reached the stairwell, I turned the corner, desperate to get out of the garage. But the moment I did, the footsteps stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I glanced over my shoulder one last time, expecting to see someone standing at the corner, waiting for me to make a move. But there was nothing. Just the empty, dimly lit garage stretching out behind me. I hesitated, unsure whether to keep running or turn around. The cold air in the stairwell felt like a brief relief from the oppressive atmosphere of the parking garage. My heart still raced, my breath shallow as I slowly made my way up the stairs. Every step echoed in the narrow space, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still there, watching me from the shadows. I reached the top of the stairwell and pushed open the door to the street. The cool night air hit my face, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. I looked back at the garage, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway watching me, but there was no one there. The parking garage was silent, empty. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and checked the time. It had only been a few minutes since I had started walking through the garage, but it felt like hours had passed. I couldn't explain what had happened, whether it was my mind playing tricks on me or something far more sinister. But I knew one thing for sure: I would never walk through that parking garage alone again. Story 24. It was a warm afternoon, and I decided to sit outside at a small cafe I frequented. The sun was just beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the cobblestone street. I had ordered my usual, a latte with a slice of almond cake, and was slowly savoring the afternoon in the quiet of the city. People were walking by, some in groups, others alone, and the soft murmur of conversations filled the air. As I took a sip of my drink, I noticed a man walking past my table. He was tall, dressed in a long coat despite the warmth of the day, his movements deliberate. He didn't seem out of place, just another person going about their day. He passed by without looking at me, but then, to my surprise, he stopped just a few steps ahead, turned around, and dropped a napkin onto my table. I watched, bewildered, as the man didn't pause to explain or even glance back. He simply dropped the napkin with a swift motion and continued walking, his figure soon blending into the crowd. My gaze shifted to the napkin, now resting on my table, the corners slightly crumpled from the fall. I reached for it, unsure what to expect. The words on the napkin were simple, written in a hurried hand: "Don't go home yet." A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the note. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who had written this? Why me? The words seemed so out of place, like a warning or an odd piece of advice from a stranger. I looked around, expecting to see the man nearby, watching me, but he was gone. I felt suddenly exposed, like the whole world was watching me, waiting for my next move. I unfolded the napkin further, trying to see if there was more to it. But that was all. No explanation, no further detail. Just those 4 words that seemed to hang in the air like an unanswered question. Should I stay here longer? Should I just ignore it and go home as planned? I was alone at the cafe, and the idea of going back to my apartment was starting to feel less inviting. But why? I glanced around again, hoping for some sign, some indication of what I should do. The cafe was still full of people, none of them paying any attention to me. The world outside seemed unaware of the strange moment that had just occurred. I folded the napkin and tucked it into my bag, deciding to stay for a little while longer, just to see if anything else happened. Time passed in a blur, and I found myself staring at the empty street. The sun had almost disappeared completely now, the streetlights flickering on one by one. There was a strange tension in the air, like something was about to happen, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I still felt uneasy, my heart beating just a little faster than usual. I glanced at my watch. Nearly an hour had passed since the man had dropped the napkin. Should I go home now? I asked myself. Was it all just a coincidence, or was I being paranoid? I looked down at the napkin in my bag. It seemed harmless enough. Maybe someone had just thought it would be funny or intriguing to leave me with a cryptic message. Maybe it wasn't meant to be taken seriously. But something kept tugging at me, a feeling deep in my gut that I couldn't shake. I stood up, gathered my things, and left the cafe, feeling a mixture of reluctance and curiosity. I needed to know if I was overreacting, if my imagination was just running wild. As I walked down the street, I tried to focus on the sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the chatter of people walking by, but my mind kept returning to that napkin. When I turned the corner, I felt it. A presence behind me. I couldn't help but quicken my pace, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. I glanced over my shoulder, but no one was there. My heart was racing now, the quiet of the street making everything feel far too still. I reached for my phone, intending to call a friend or maybe the police, but then I stopped myself. What was I going to say? A man gave me a note telling me not to go home. I continued walking, my mind a swirl of thoughts. I reached the intersection near my apartment, my usual path home. It was well lit, bustling with people going about their evening. For a moment I felt safe again, like maybe I had been overthinking the whole situation. The note was just some odd encounter with a stranger, nothing more. But as I approached the door to my building, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, just outside, standing in the shadows, was the man from earlier. He hadn't noticed me yet, but I recognized his figure immediately. The same tall, dark coat. My pulse quickened as I backed away slowly, trying to stay out of his line of sight. What was he doing here? How long had he been standing there? My mind raced as I considered my options. I could rush into the building and call for help, or I could wait and see if he noticed me. But the more I stood there, the more certain I became that this wasn't a coincidence. The note, the strange feeling I had, the way he was standing there, everything seemed connected. I turned, walking quickly toward the alley behind my building, hoping to lose him in the shadows. My breath was coming faster now, each step more urgent than the last. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. But when I reached the end of the alley and peeked around the corner, he was gone. The streets were quiet again, but my heart was still racing. What had just happened? Why had he been following me? I didn't know the answers, but I was certain of one thing: I wasn't going home tonight. I found a nearby hotel, checked in under a false name, and spent the night there. The next day, I called in sick to work. The feeling hadn't left me. I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been watching me, even after all of it was over. The note in my bag, the man, the strange message, it all felt too real, too deliberate. I wasn't sure who was behind it or why, but I knew one thing: I wouldn't ignore a warning again. Story 25. I was deep in sleep, the kind of sleep where the world outside feels distant and muted. The moonlight filtering through my window was soft, casting a faint glow over the room. My mind was adrift in dreams when suddenly I heard a sound that made my heart leap in my chest. The soft, deliberate click of my doorknob turning slowly. At first, I thought it was a figment of my dream, something imagined in the haze between sleep and wakefulness. But then the sound repeated, unmistakable, real. My breath caught in my throat and I froze. I knew I was alone in the house. I always made sure to lock the door before bed, double-checking the bolt to ensure nothing could disturb my peace. Yet there it was again: someone or something was trying to get in. The room felt colder, despite the warmth of the covers. My mind raced, heart hammering as I lay perfectly still, trying not to make a sound. I strained my ears, listening for any other noises, footsteps, breathing, anything that could give me a clue as to who or what was at my door. There was nothing but silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to weigh on the air. The doorknob rattled again, slower this time, like someone was testing its strength. I dared not move, too afraid that even the slightest shift would alert whatever was outside. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, each beat a reminder of the fear gnawing at me. Was it someone breaking in? Had I left the door unlocked, or had someone somehow found a way in? I mentally ran through the layout of the house. There was no back door that could be easily accessed, no windows near the ground that were left ajar. The only way in was through this door, and whoever was on the other side was determined to get through. The sound of the doorknob turning again was followed by a soft scraping, as if something was gently being dragged across the wood of the doorframe. My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but my voice was caught in my throat, and all I could do was stare at the door, my body paralyzed with fear. I wished I had a weapon, anything that could protect me from whatever threat was slowly encroaching on my space. But the room felt so quiet, too quiet, like the entire world was holding its breath. Suddenly, the turning of the doorknob stopped. For a moment, I thought maybe the person outside had given up and walked away. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, I realized that wasn't the case. I could feel a presence at the door, as if someone were standing just beyond it, waiting for me to make a move. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but the fear was paralyzing. Should I call the police? Should I hide somewhere? I didn't want to make a noise, but I knew I had to act fast. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my fingers trembling as I dialed 911. I pressed the phone to my ear, praying that the call would connect before whatever was outside heard me. The phone rang, each tone ringing louder in the silence of the room, but I kept my focus on the door, straining to hear any sign that someone was trying to break in. I couldn't let my guard down. Just as I was about to speak into the phone, the door creaked slowly, agonizingly, like it was being pushed open. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed the phone to my chest, holding back a gasp. The door didn't open fully, but it was ajar now, and I could hear something or someone breathing on the other side. My pulse quickened, and I fought the urge to look. I needed to stay calm. I couldn't let them know I was here. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in, suffocating me. Was this a prank? A nightmare? Or was there someone truly trying to invade my space? The thought of it sent a fresh wave of terror through me, but I knew I couldn't let myself panic. The line on my phone was still open, but the dispatcher hadn't picked up yet. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to do something. I carefully set the phone down and reached for the lamp on my nightstand. The soft glow from the lamp wasn't much, but it was something. I reached for the closet door behind me, trying to make as little noise as possible. I had to hide, had to get away from whatever was creeping into my room. But as I shifted in the bed, a creaking sound came from the door, a slow push from the other side. I turned toward the sound. The door was moving. The air felt thick, electric with the unknown. The light from the lamp cast long shadows on the floor, and I could see the outline of the door swinging just slightly. Someone was coming in. I could feel their presence now, like they were standing just outside the door, watching me. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house, and I froze. My mind couldn't process it at first. Where had it come from? But then I realized that it was the sound of the door slamming shut. My heart raced, my thoughts spinning. What had just happened? Who had closed it? And why? I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the door. I twisted the handle, half expecting to find someone standing on the other side, but when the door opened, there was nothing. No one. I stepped into the hallway, my breath coming in short gasps, searching for any signs of an intruder. But the house was silent again, too silent. It was as if nothing had happened at all. I checked every room, every corner of the house, making sure the locks were still intact, that no one had gotten in. But there was no sign of anyone. The house was empty, and yet the fear lingered, thick in the air like a cloud I couldn't shake. Had I imagined it all? Was it some trick of the mind, a figment of my imagination fueled by fear? I couldn't be sure. But I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept the lights on, the door locked, and my phone in my hand, just in case. Whatever had happened, I knew one thing for sure: something had been at that door. Story 26. I was walking home from work on a cool, quiet evening, my footsteps echoing against the empty sidewalk. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows along the road. My thoughts were miles away, lost in the routine of my day, when I heard a car approaching from behind. I didn't think much of it at first, until the car slowed down beside me. "Hey, it's good to see you," a voice called out from the driver's seat. I glanced up in surprise as a man's face appeared in the window, his smile wide and friendly. He was older, maybe in his mid-40s, with short brown hair and a look that was both casual and familiar. But the problem was, I didn't recognize him at all. I stopped walking, staring at him, trying to place his face. Sorry, do I know you?" I asked, my voice sounding small in the stillness of the evening. The man's smile didn't falter. Instead, it grew even wider, as if he had just been waiting for me to ask. "Of course you do," he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "It's been a while, hasn't it? How have you been?" His tone was cheerful, but something about it felt off. I stood there for a moment, confused. I tried to search my memory for a clue, but nothing came to mind. I couldn't remember ever meeting this man, let alone being friends with him. I forced a polite smile, hoping to end this odd encounter quickly. "I'm sorry, I think you've mistaken me for someone else," I said, my voice shaky now. "I don't think we've met." The man's expression shifted for a brief second, almost imperceptibly, but the smile returned quickly. He didn't seem upset, just a little confused. "You're not serious, are you?" he asked, leaning closer to the window. "Come on, don't you remember? We used to hang out all the time. I thought you'd recognize me by now." His eyes twinkled, like he was enjoying some private joke, and my unease grew stronger. This wasn't normal. There was no way I had ever known him, and yet his confidence made it seem like he expected me to. "I really don't know who you are," I said, a little more forcefully this time. "I'm sorry, but I need to go." I started to walk away, my heart racing as I picked up the pace. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck talking to someone I didn't know in the dark. But as I turned to leave, I heard his voice again. Wait, he called out, sounding almost too eager. "Don't you remember when we went to that party last summer? You looked amazing in that dress, remember? You even laughed when I tried to make a joke about the band." His words hit me like a wave, and I froze in my tracks. I had no memory of any party, and I certainly didn't recall wearing any dress like that. I felt my skin prickle with a mixture of confusion and dread. Turning slowly, I glanced back at the car. The man's smile remained the same, but there was something unsettling about it now. It was too wide, too eager, as if he was trying to convince himself as much as me. I forced myself to speak, even though my voice trembled. "I'm sorry, but I really don't know you," I repeated, feeling the words leave my mouth like an empty declaration. He seemed to consider this for a moment, his gaze never leaving me. Then, with a sudden flash of understanding, or was it mockery, he nodded as if everything had suddenly clicked into place. "Ah, I see. You don't remember," he said, his voice dropping a little, becoming quieter. "Well, that's okay. It happens. But you'll remember eventually. I'm sure of it." I couldn't understand what he meant by that, but the words sent a chill down my spine. I took another step backward, my feet moving of their own accord. I had to get away from him, from this strange, unsettling situation. The man seemed to sense my growing unease because his smile faltered for a split second, but it quickly returned, almost like a mask slipping back into place. "I'll let you go then," he said, his voice suddenly too calm. "But don't be a stranger. I'm sure we'll run into each other again soon." With that, he shifted the car into gear and drove away, his eyes still on me as he turned the corner. I watched him disappear down the street, still unsure of what had just happened. I stood there for a few moments, trying to make sense of the encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. How could someone recognize me so clearly, but I had no memory of them? It didn't make any sense. Was I forgetting something important? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thoughts, but the lingering sense of unease wouldn't go away. As I continued walking home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the car reappear behind me. But the street remained empty, silent. I couldn't stop thinking about the man's smile, the way it seemed too practiced, too familiar, and yet it wasn't. It felt as though he was playing a part in some strange, unsettling game. When I finally reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, my heart still racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't seen the last of him. Who was he? How could he know things about me that I didn't even remember? I tried to push the questions aside, telling myself it was just a strange coincidence, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next few days passed uneventfully, but I couldn't forget the man's face. Every time I stepped outside, I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him in the distance. His words echoed in my mind, "You'll remember eventually." What did he mean by that? And why had he been so certain? I couldn't stop wondering, and as the days went on, the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. It was only when I was walking home one evening, several days later, that I saw the car again. This time it wasn't just a random passing glance. It was parked a few blocks down, and I could swear I saw him inside, watching me. The smile, that same unsettling smile, was there, just as it had been before. My heart skipped a beat. Was I about to remember something I wasn't ready to? Story 27. It was one of those nights where the office felt too quiet, too still. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing faintly as I sat hunched over my desk, scrolling through a mountain of paperwork. I volunteered to stay late to catch up on some tasks, knowing that the rest of the team would be back in the morning. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of a keyboard tap or the hum of a computer. The building felt empty, save for me and the distant noise of the HVAC system. I had just finished a long stretch of tedious reports when the phone rang. It was strange because it had been hours since the last call and there was no one else in the office. I glanced at my desk phone, the screen lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. Odd, but not entirely unusual. Sometimes our clients called after hours. But then I saw it. The caller ID showed that the call was coming from my own desk phone. I froze, staring at the screen in confusion. How could the call be coming from my phone? I wasn't calling anyone. The phone rang again, and I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, my heart rate quickening for reasons I couldn't explain. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding unnervingly loud in the otherwise empty room. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. Then I heard a faint clicking noise, like someone was pressing buttons on the other end of the line, but no voice answered. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if someone was desperately trying to dial something. I held the phone tighter, staring at the screen as the call timer continued to tick upward, but no one spoke. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I instinctively glanced around the office, half expecting someone to be standing in the doorway or behind me. But there was nothing, no shadowy figure, no sudden movement. Just the empty desks, the dimly lit space, and the unsettling sound of the clicking phone. My grip tightened on the receiver, and I felt a surge of both curiosity and dread. What was going on? The clicking stopped, and then, almost as if responding to my thoughts, a voice came through. But it wasn't one I recognized. It was soft, distorted, like it was coming from far away or through a speakerphone with a bad connection. "I see you," the voice whispered, its words cutting through the silence like a blade. My blood ran cold. I didn't know who it was, but there was something about the voice that made my heart pound in my chest. The line went dead before I could say anything, and I stared at the phone, still holding it to my ear, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced, trying to rationalize the situation. It could have been a prank, right? Maybe someone was messing with me, though it didn't feel like any prank I had ever experienced. The voice had been so chilling, so unnatural, that it sent a wave of unease through my entire body. I quickly hung up the phone, my hands shaking as I set the receiver back on the cradle. The office seemed even quieter now, and for a moment, I thought I could hear the soft hum of the building's air conditioning unit, but everything else was eerily still. My thoughts were racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I should leave. I should just pack up and go home. But I couldn't. My curiosity had been piqued, and I felt an overwhelming need to figure out what had just happened. I glanced at my desk phone again, but it was silent now, the screen showing nothing but a blank display. I sat there for a few moments, gathering my thoughts, when I heard something, a faint clicking sound, like the one I had heard earlier. It came from the phone, and it was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. But no, it was real. It was happening again. I picked up the receiver cautiously, my breath catching in my throat. This time there was no voice, just that same unsettling clicking sound. The more I listened, the more I realized it wasn't random. The clicks seemed to follow a pattern, almost like someone was typing something. My stomach churned, and I felt an overwhelming urge to hang up, but I couldn't. It was as if something beyond my control was forcing me to stay on the line, to keep listening. Then, the voice returned. But this time it was clearer, more distinct. "I know what you did," it whispered, the words laced with an unsettling tone. My mind raced, trying to understand who this could be, what they wanted, and why my own phone was involved. The air in the office felt thick, as though something unseen was watching me, waiting for me to move. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "I see everything," the voice continued, its tone growing more menacing. "You can't hide." I slammed the phone back into the cradle, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to spin for a moment, and I fought to steady my breathing. The eerie voice echoed in my mind, replaying over and over again. What did it mean? Who was on the other end of the line? And how were they able to call me from my own phone? My thoughts spiraled into a whirlwind of questions, none of them with any answers. I stood up from my desk, pacing the small office as I tried to calm myself down. The silence of the room was deafening now, and I felt as if I was suffocating under its weight. I glanced at the clock on the wall, almost midnight. I needed to leave, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was still watching me. Just as I was about to gather my things, the phone rang again. The caller ID said the same thing, my own desk phone. My heart skipped a beat, and I hesitated for a long moment before reaching for the receiver. This time I didn't answer. I let it ring, the sound growing louder with each passing second, until it stopped on its own. The office was dead silent once again, but the eerie feeling remained, hanging in the air like a dark cloud, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I left the office that night without another word, but I couldn't escape the lingering sense that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was still watching me. Story 28. It had been a long day and I was eager to get home. The sun had already set, casting an orange glow across the sky, and the last thing I wanted to do was sit in a crowded restaurant. I decided to stop by the drive-thru at my usual fast food place. The drive-thru line was surprisingly long, but I didn't mind. I could always use a few minutes to unwind before heading home. I made my way to the window, slowly inching up as I waited for my turn. When I finally reached the cashier, a young woman with a friendly smile greeted me. She quickly processed my order, handing me my food and drink. As she handed me my change, she looked at me with a strange intensity, her eyes lingering a little too long. Then, in a quiet, almost inaudible voice, she whispered, "That man in the car behind you has been here all day." I froze for a moment, blinking in confusion. "What?" I muttered, thinking I must have misunderstood her. The woman quickly glanced at the car behind me, then back at me, her face showing an expression I couldn't quite read, part concern, part unease. "He's been sitting in that car for hours," she said again, her voice barely a whisper. I tried to hide my unease as I took my change and food. The man in the car behind me had been there all day. My curiosity spiked, and I found myself glancing at the car in the rearview mirror. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, just a sedan, a man in his late 40s or early 50s sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead. But something about the way the cashier spoke made my skin crawl. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed my growing anxiety. The woman nodded but didn't say anything more. She seemed hesitant, almost like she didn't want to talk about it. I could feel her eyes on me as I slowly pulled away from the window, the man's car still in my rearview mirror. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to focus on the road as I drove, but the thought of the man behind me gnawed at my mind. Why had he been sitting there all day? Why hadn't he left? The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up, and the more unsettled I became. I had to know more, so I decided to take a quick detour. I made a few turns trying to see if the man would follow me, but when I glanced in the rearview mirror again, he was still there, right behind me. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to go home and forget about the strange encounter, but another part of me was too curious to let it go. I pulled into a nearby parking lot, keeping an eye on the car behind me. The man didn't follow me into the lot, he simply stayed in the same spot on the road, not moving an inch. I sat there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. What was going on? Why would he stay in his car for so long, especially at a drive-thru? There were no signs of him leaving anytime soon, and the more I thought about it, the more his presence unsettled me. Maybe he was just waiting for someone, or perhaps he was just a regular customer. But something in the back of my mind told me there was more to it than that. I decided to leave the parking lot and head home, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. As I drove, I glanced at my rearview mirror once more. The man's car was still there, trailing behind me at a safe distance. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, that it was just a coincidence. But the longer I thought about it, the more it felt like something was wrong. When I turned onto my street, I decided to make one more quick loop around the block to see if the man would still be there. Sure enough, as I made my way back, I saw his car again, still behind me, as if it had been following me the whole time. I didn't know if I should feel relieved or terrified, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I parked in my driveway, watching the man's car through the window. He had stopped at the end of the street, just sitting there, as though waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, but I didn't know what to do about it. It was as if I had become part of whatever strange story was unfolding, and I couldn't escape. My mind raced, wondering if the cashier's words had been a warning or just a coincidence. I thought about going inside and calling the police, but what would I say? A man's been sitting in his car for hours. It sounded ridiculous. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off, that I was being drawn into something I didn't understand. I kept my eyes on the man's car for what felt like an eternity, until, without warning, the car began to pull away. I held my breath, watching as the headlights flickered on and the car turned onto the main road. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe the man had simply been waiting for someone else. But as his car disappeared into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something strange. And as I sat there, staring out the window, I couldn't help but wonder what had the cashier meant when she said he had been there all day, and why had she whispered it to me in such a way. Story 29. It was just after midnight when I sat down at my computer, the soft hum of the machine the only sound in the quiet house. I had just finished a long day, and I was hoping to wind down by catching up on some emails. I opened my inbox, scrolling through the usual spam and work updates, when something unusual caught my eye. The subject line simply read, "Just checking." I clicked on the email without much thought, thinking it was probably a message from a friend or a random marketing email. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. There was no text, just an attachment, a photo. My first instinct was to delete it immediately. Something about it felt wrong, but curiosity won out. I hovered over the attachment and clicked, half expecting it to be some kind of prank or a virus. The photo loaded slowly, but once it appeared, I froze. It was a picture of my house, taken from the street. It was exactly the same as it looked from the outside, down to the worn welcome mat on the porch, and the faint glow of light coming from the living room window. I glanced around my own living room nervously, trying to reassure myself that it was just a coincidence. But the timestamp on the photo read the same date and time I was sitting at my computer. A chill crept up my spine and my hands trembled as I scrolled down to see if there was any message attached to the photo. But there was nothing. No words, no explanation, just the image. I checked the sender's email address. Just checking didn't seem like a valid name, and the email address was a jumble of random letters and numbers. I ran my cursor over the email, hesitant to click anything further. I quickly closed the email, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but the image lingered in my mind. The darkness of the night outside my window seemed to press in closer, as if it were trying to suffocate me. I sat still for a few minutes, heart racing, trying to convince myself that it was just a bad joke. Maybe it was a prank from a friend who knew where I lived. But who would go to the trouble of sending something so unnerving? The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I decided to take a look out the window, just to calm my nerves. Maybe it was nothing, just a random coincidence. But when I peeked through the blinds, I saw nothing unusual, just the empty street, the quiet houses, and the trees swaying in the wind. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. There was no one in sight, no cars parked nearby. Still, The gnawing feeling in my stomach didn't go away. I stared at the screen for a while, considering what to do next. My gut told me something was off. I knew that I should probably call someone, maybe the police, but I hesitated. What would I even tell them? Someone sent me a creepy email with a picture of my house. I wasn't sure if they would take it seriously, but then I remembered a moment from a few weeks ago. I had seen a car drive slowly past my house late at night. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe it was just a lost driver or someone out for a late night drive. But now, thinking back, it felt like it was more than that. I tried to calm myself. It could be nothing. It could just be some random person who found my address online and decided to mess with me. But as I sat there, staring at the screen, I knew deep down that it wasn't a coincidence. I checked the email one more time, trying to trace its origins. But there was no information to follow, no way to find out who had sent it. The photo had been taken that same night, but there was no indication of who had taken it. My phone buzzed on the table beside me, snapping me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, relieved for the distraction. It was a message from my best friend, asking if I was still awake. I quickly typed back, telling her about the email and how freaked out I was. She replied almost immediately, urging me to call the police or at least someone who could help. It felt like a small comfort, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went to the front door, checking the locks just to reassure myself. I couldn't help but feel like someone was watching me, waiting for me to do something. I ran to the back of the house and checked the door there as well. Everything was locked, and there was nothing out of place. Still, the photo and the email kept playing in my mind. I spent the next few minutes pacing back and forth, debating what to do. I wasn't sure if I should wait for something else to happen, or if I should take action now. Finally, I made up my mind. I was going to call the police. I needed to know if I was overreacting or if there was something more to the picture. I dialed the number, my hands shaking as I held the phone to my ear. When the dispatcher answered, I explained the situation as best as I could, leaving out my fears about it being something supernatural. They said they would send someone to check it out, but I had to wait. I spent the next hour staring out the window, watching the empty street as the night dragged on. It felt like time had slowed to a crawl. Every passing car seemed to take forever, and the shadows outside seemed to grow longer. I couldn't shake the feeling that the photo wasn't just a harmless prank. It felt like a warning. When the police finally arrived, they checked the perimeter of my house, but found nothing unusual. They took a report, asked if I had seen anything strange recently, but they didn't seem too concerned. They told me to call again if anything else happened. As they left, I felt a brief sense of relief, but it didn't last long. The email, the photo, the feeling of being watched, it all lingered, pressing on my chest. As I locked the door behind them, I couldn't help but wonder who was really just checking, and what else were they watching? Story 30. I walked into the coffee shop early that morning, hoping to get a jump start on my day. The scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a comforting warmth that seemed to push away the lingering chill of the morning. I made my way to the counter and ordered my usual black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and then found a quiet corner by the window to sit. The soft hum of conversations around me and the sound of the espresso machine working its magic created a sense of calm, a welcome break from the hectic pace of life outside. I sat down with my cup, pulling out my notebook to jot down a few thoughts. The quiet atmosphere of the coffee shop always helped me focus, and I was looking forward to a productive morning. The only distraction was the pair of men sitting at the table next to me, who seemed to be in the middle of a lively conversation. Their voices were low enough to not be bothersome, but I couldn't help but catch a few words as they drifted over. At first, I thought they were just talking about something mundane the way most people do when they meet for coffee. But as I listened more closely, I realized they were discussing my outfit. "That shirt looks like it's made from some expensive fabric," one of them said, his tone casual, but sharp. "And those shoes definitely high-end. Do you think she knows how much she's wearing right now?" I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. It wasn't unusual for people to notice what others were wearing, but the way they were dissecting my clothes felt intrusive. I had never considered myself particularly fashionable, but I had put a bit of thought into my outfit that morning. It was a simple blouse and jeans, nothing extravagant. Still, their commentary felt invasive, like they were studying me under a microscope. The other man chuckled, continuing the analysis. "Look at how she carries herself, though. She knows. You can tell." I could hear a slight smirk in his voice, a kind of smug satisfaction that made my skin prickle. It wasn't just the fact that they were talking about me, it was the way they seemed to think I couldn't hear them, as if they were entitled to discuss me as though I weren't even there. I tried to focus on my notebook, hoping that if I ignored them they would move on to a different topic. But it was impossible to block out their voices. They kept commenting, more specifically now. "Those jeans fit her perfectly," one of them remarked. "It's like she's making a statement without even trying." The words felt like daggers, each one landing with more weight than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were enjoying the power they had by making me feel like an object under their scrutiny. I shifted in my seat, glancing around the coffee shop in search of an escape. But it was too late. Both men had turned their attention toward me, their eyes locked onto my every move. I could feel their gaze, like invisible fingers tracing the outline of my body. It made my stomach churn, and I couldn't help but feel exposed. There was nowhere to hide. The moment I glanced up, they noticed. Both men's faces broke into wide smirks, their eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of amusement and superiority. It felt as though they were waiting for me to react, to somehow prove that their judgment had been right. But I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of showing how uncomfortable I was. Instead, I kept my expression neutral, forcing myself to look at them without breaking my calm facade. I knew they were waiting for me to show some sign of vulnerability, some indication that their words had landed. But I wasn't about to let them see me flinch. I kept my focus on my coffee, pretending I hadn't overheard a single word. But their smirks didn't fade. One of them leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and tilting his head, like he was savoring the moment. "You know," he said, loud enough for me to hear, "she's probably used to this kind of attention. I bet she gets it all the time." The words stung, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't give them what they wanted. The other man chuckled again, looking over at his friend with an expression of amusement. "Yeah, she's got that vibe," he agreed. "Confident but a little untouchable. She's got it all figured out." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. I didn't know whether to stand up and walk out of the shop or confront them. The thought of telling them off, of saying something sharp to shut them up, flickered through my mind, but I wasn't sure if that would make things better or worse. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. I reminded myself that I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them my comfort or my vulnerability. I was just a person trying to enjoy my morning like everyone else in that coffee shop. If they felt the need to make me the subject of their conversation, it was a reflection of them, not me. I stood up, gathering my things, and walked toward the counter to pay for my coffee. The two men watched me as I passed, their eyes following me with that same unnerving intensity. But I refused to look back. As I waited in line to pay, I could hear them muttering to each other, their conversation shifting to something else. I wasn't sure if they were still talking about me or if they had moved on. Either way, I was done. After I paid, I left the coffee shop, stepping out into the fresh air. The cool breeze helped clear the lingering tension in my chest, and I felt the weight of their stares finally lift. I realized something as I walked away from the shop. Their judgment had nothing to do with me. It was about them, their need to feel superior by scrutinizing someone else. I didn't need their approval, and I wasn't going to let their words ruin my day. The world felt a little lighter as I walked down the street, free from their gaze. I could still hear their voices echoing in my mind, but they no longer had the power to affect me. I had learned to block them out, to let their judgment fall away like the meaningless noise it was. I was me, and that was enough.